Every struggle you've tried to fix on the outside began as a storm on the inside. The world feels loud, unpredictable, demanding. People disappoint, plans fall apart, and no matter how hard you try to control what happens around you, life keeps moving in its own direction. When the lights go out, when the day finally releases you, that tension doesn't disappear. It follows you into the quiet, into the thoughts you replay, into the emotions you never had time to feel. We were taught to manage everything except ourselves, to react quickly, to explain, to defend, to hold on tighter when things feel uncertain. But control was never meant to live outside of you. The more you try to shape the world, the more restless the mind becomes, and the more exhausted the body feels. There is another way. Not forcing, not resisting, not fixing everything at once, but learning how to return inward, learning how to guide your thoughts instead of being dragged by them, learning how to stay steady while life moves freely around you. The ancient Stoics understood this deeply. They knew that peace does not come from changing events, but from mastering responses. That true strength is quiet. That when the mind is trained, nothing external can disturb it for long. And that the night, when defenses soften and awareness drifts, is the most powerful time to rewire the inner world. That is why this will play while you sleep, not to overwhelm you, not to push, but to gently remind your mind what it no longer needs to carry. Tonight is not about controlling life. It's about releasing the struggle with it, about calming the inner voice that tries to manage everything, about learning, slowly, softly, that when you control yourself, the world loses its power over you. Let the body rest, let the mind loosen its grip, and allow this night to do what effort never could. There is a kind of strength that never announces itself. It doesn't raise its voice. It doesn't rush to defend or explain. It doesn't need to win. This strength lives in restraint, in the ability to stay still when everything inside you wants to move. Non-reaction is often mistaken for weakness, but in truth, it is one of the most disciplined forms of control a person can develop. Most of our suffering does not come from what happens, but from how quickly we respond to it. A comment lands wrong, a memory resurfaces, a situation doesn't go as planned. Before awareness has time to step in, the mind reacts. Words are said, emotions flare, the body tightens, and suddenly peace is gone. Not because the moment demanded it, but because the reaction did. Non-reaction does not mean suppressing feelings or pretending nothing matters. It means allowing the first wave to pass without acting on it. Every emotion arrives with momentum. If you do nothing, that momentum fades on its own. Like a ripple in water, it settles if it isn't disturbed. But when you react immediately, you give the emotion a task, a direction, a story. You turn a feeling into a problem. The nervous system plays a quiet role here. When you react, the body enters a state of threat. Heart rate increases, muscles tighten, breathing becomes shallow. This state is useful only for danger, yet we trigger it for emails, conversations, memories, and imagined futures. Over time, the body forgets how to relax. Non-reaction teaches the nervous system that not every signal requires action. Safety returns. The body learns calm again. There is also a shift in self-respect. Each time you choose not to react, you send a message inward. You are not controlled by impulses. You are not owned by every emotion that passes through you. This builds trust with yourself. You begin to feel grounded, not because life is stable, but because you are. Others may try to provoke, test, or pull you into their emotional storms, but non-reaction quietly removes their leverage. Silence can feel uncomfortable at first. The mind is used to filling space, to responding quickly, to proving something. When you pause instead, the ego feels exposed. It wants reassurance. It wants to be seen. But if you stay with the discomfort, something surprising happens. Clarity appears. You start to see situations more accurately. You notice patterns in others. You recognize when a reaction would only feed chaos. Non-reaction also protects energy. Every emotional response costs something: attention, focus, vitality. When you stop reacting to what does not truly matter, energy returns to you. Sleep improves. Thoughts become quieter. Decisions become cleaner. You stop replaying conversations that never needed to happen. Life feels lighter, not because problems disappear, but because you stop carrying them unnecessarily. There is a quiet confidence that grows from this practice, not the loud kind that seeks approval, but the steady kind that remains unchanged. People feel it. They may not understand it, but they sense it. Calm presence has weight. It shifts conversations. It changes dynamics without effort. When you don't react, others often reveal more of themselves. Their urgency fades, their tone softens, or their intentions become clear. This is especially powerful at night, when the mind reviews the day. Reactions echo in the dark. Words replay. Regrets grow louder. But when you practice non-reaction during the day, the night becomes gentler. The mind has less to untangle. Sleep deepens. Rest becomes real. The body finally understands that it does not need to stay alert. Non-reaction is not something you master all at once. It is a habit built in moments that seem too small to matter. A pause before replying. A breath before responding. A choice to let silence speak. Each time you choose stillness, you weaken the grip of chaos and strengthen the center within you. As that inner stillness becomes familiar, a new kind of awareness starts to rise. The mind no longer jumps at every spark, so it begins to notice something deeper. How often tension doesn't come from events, but from people. Not what they do, but what you wish they would do. Not what they say, but what you wish they would understand. And slowly, one truth becomes hard to ignore. Many of your reactions were never only about the moment. They were also about a hidden mission you've been carrying for years, trying to fix others. There's a quiet sadness behind that habit. It often starts with love. Caring deeply, wanting someone to heal, wanting them to choose better, think clearer, stop hurting themselves, stop hurting you. It can feel noble, even necessary. But the more you try to repair someone from the outside, the more you weaken yourself from the inside. Not because you're wrong for caring, but because you're placing your peace in hands you cannot control. Trying to fix people creates a constant inner strain. Your mind stays on alert, tracking their moods, their choices, their progress, their failures. You become emotionally invested in outcomes that are not yours to direct. When they change, you feel relief. When they don't, you feel frustration. Over time, their life becomes your emotional weather, and that is a heavy way to live. It also quietly trains you to abandon your own needs. Fixing someone often means focusing on their feelings more than yours. You start adjusting your words, your tone, your timing, hoping you'll finally reach them in the right way. You become careful, strategic, exhausted. And the strange part is, the more effort you put in, the more invisible you can feel. because the relationship becomes centered around their problems and your attempts to manage them. There's another painful layer. When you try to fix someone, you accidentally send a message that they are not capable. Even if your intentions are pure, they may feel judged, controlled, or reduced to a project. And people rarely heal when they feel managed. Real change needs ownership. It needs a person to look at their own life and decide without pressure that they are ready. If that choice isn't theirs, no amount of your effort will create lasting transformation. It might create compliance for a while, but not growth. This is why fixing often backfires. Advice becomes arguments. Help becomes resentment. Support becomes a quiet power struggle. You start measuring them against the version you wish they were. They start resisting the pressure they can't fully name. And even when you win a moment, you lose something else. Closeness, trust, ease. The relationship stops feeling natural and starts feeling like work. The habit is also rooted in a hidden fear that if you don't fix them, things will fall apart, that their choices will affect you, that their pain will spread, that you'll be blamed, that you'll regret not doing more. This fear can make you overfunction. You do the emotional labor for two people. You carry the responsibility they refuse to carry. And at first it feels like strength. But it's not strength. It's a slow leak of your energy, your time, your emotional clarity. Another reason it weakens you is because it keeps your attention outward. Instead of using your discipline to shape your own mind and actions, you spend it trying to reshape someone else. You begin to rehearse conversations in your head, plan how to make them see, search for the perfect words, the perfect article, the perfect example. The mind stays busy, but not free. And when your inner world is filled with strategies for changing others, there is less space for peace, creativity, or real rest. Fixing also creates a trap of identity. You become the responsible one, the helper, the one who understands. It can feel meaningful, even comforting, to have a role. But roles can become cages. When your worth is tied to being needed, you may unconsciously keep people in a state of needing. Not on purpose, not with bad intent, but because your sense of value gets tangled with their brokenness. This is one of the most overlooked forms of attachment. Letting go of fixing doesn't mean becoming cold. It means learning a healthier form of care. Care that does not control. Care that does not chase. Care that does not sacrifice your stability. It's the difference between holding space and holding responsibility. You can listen without solving. You can support without carrying. You can love without managing. A powerful shift happens when you stop trying to fix people and start focusing on what is actually yours. Your words, your boundaries, your choices, your reactions, your standards, your inner peace. This doesn't guarantee others will change, but it guarantees you won't lose yourself trying. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to stop interrupting someone's lessons, not because you want them to suffer, but because you respect their path. Growth is often built through consequences, reflection, and time. When you constantly rescue, correct, or steer, you may delay the very awakening you hope for. And as that truth settles in, you start to feel stronger in a new way. Not tense, not responsible for everyone, not pulled into emotional repair work, just steady, present, clear. You begin to understand that your peace was never meant to be earned through fixing the world. It was meant to be protected through mastering yourself. As the need to fix others slowly loosens its grip, something unfamiliar but powerful begins to take its place. The mind feels less crowded. The emotional weight you were carrying for other people starts to fall away. And in that space, a different kind of strength becomes visible. Not loud, not dramatic, but precise. This is where emotional neutrality begins. Not as indifference, but as clarity. There is a calm that unsettles people more than anger ever could. Not because it threatens, but because it cannot be pulled. Emotional neutrality removes hooks. When there is nothing to grab, nothing to provoke, nothing to push against, power quietly shifts back to you. This is not about shutting down feelings, it's about choosing not to bleed energy into every moment that asks for a reaction. Emotional neutrality means you stop feeding situations with unnecessary emotion. You still feel, but you don't pour yourself into every trigger. You observe before engaging. This creates distance between stimulus and response, and in that distance, intelligence lives. When emotions run high, perception narrows. You miss details. You misread intentions. Neutrality widens the lens. You see patterns instead of insults. You hear information instead of tone. You respond to reality, not noise. This is why neutrality is strategic. When you're emotionally charged, you're predictable. Buttons work. Triggers land. People who want control rely on this. They push for reactions because reactions reveal leverage. But when you remain steady, their influence weakens. Conversations change. Conflicts lose momentum. Even manipulative behavior struggles to survive without emotional fuel. Calm doesn't escalate. Calm ends games. There's also a deep internal benefit. Emotional neutrality reduces internal friction. The mind stops replaying scenes, arguing with ghosts, rehearsing comebacks that will never be used. Mental energy is no longer wasted on emotional spikes that lead nowhere. Instead, it becomes available for decisions, creativity, and rest. This is why people who master neutrality often appear clear-headed and decisive. Their energy isn't scattered. Neutrality also protects self-respect. When emotions control your actions, you often regret what you say or do. Apologies follow. Explanations pile up. You feel slightly out of alignment with yourself, but when you stay neutral, your actions are deliberate. You move in a way that matches your values, not your impulses. Over time, this builds a quiet confidence. You trust yourself because you know you won't abandon your center when pressure shows up. Many confuse emotional neutrality with coldness, but they are not the same. Coldness is disconnection. Neutrality is presence without attachment. You can care deeply without being consumed. You can listen fully without absorbing everything. This balance allows you to stay engaged without losing yourself. It's especially powerful in relationships where emotions often blur boundaries. Neutrality helps you respond with honesty instead of urgency, clarity instead of defensiveness. There's also a biological shift that happens. Strong emotional reactions keep the body in cycles of stress. Hormones rise. The nervous system stays alert. Over time, this wears you down. Neutrality signals safety. The body relaxes. Breathing deepens. Sleep improves. Recovery becomes possible. This is not just mental discipline, it's physical regulation. The body learns that not every moment is a threat. In difficult situations, neutrality becomes an anchor. When others panic, rush, or dramatize, you remain grounded. This doesn't mean you don't act. It means you act from clarity. People often look to the calmest person in the room during uncertainty, not because they talk the most, but because their presence stabilizes the space. Neutrality makes you reliable under pressure. It also reshapes how you experience success and failure. Emotional extremes create attachment to outcomes. You cling to wins and collapse under losses. Neutrality softens both. You appreciate success without needing it to define you. You learn from setbacks without letting them consume you. Life becomes less of an emotional roller coaster and more of a steady path. At night, this advantage deepens. Emotional neutrality reduces mental noise before sleep. The day doesn't follow you into bed as intensely. Thoughts slow. The mind rests instead of reviewing. This is where long-term change happens. When the subconscious is no longer flooded with unresolved emotion, it begins to reorganize. Sleep becomes restoration instead of escape. Developing neutrality is not about suppressing reactions forever, it's about timing. You feel what arises, but you choose when and how to engage. Most emotions don't need immediate action, they need space. When you give them that space, they often resolve themselves. What remains is information, not disturbance. And as this becomes familiar, you realize something important. Control doesn't come from dominating situations or people. It comes from mastering your emotional position within them. Neutrality gives you that position. Steady, clear, untouchable in the ways that matter. As emotional neutrality settles in, another subtle pattern begins to reveal itself. You start to notice a quiet expectation that once shaped many of your reactions. A belief that sat in the background, influencing disappointment, anger, and confusion. The idea that life, people, effort, and outcomes should line up in a fair way. When neutrality sharpens awareness, this belief becomes easier to see and harder to ignore. There is a story many of us carry without questioning it. If you do the right thing, you should be treated well. If you work hard, results should follow. If you are honest, others should be too. When this doesn't happen, the mind tightens. Thoughts repeat, emotions flare. A sense of injustice takes over. Not just pain, but confusion, because something feels broken. This is the illusion of fairness at work. Fairness feels comforting because it suggests order. It promises that effort will be rewarded and goodness will be protected. But life does not operate on moral symmetry. Events unfold through chance, timing, other people's choices, and forces far beyond your influence. When you expect fairness, you place your peace on conditions you cannot enforce. And every time reality fails to meet that expectation, the mind protests. This protest becomes mental friction. You replay situations, searching for where things went wrong. You compare yourself to others. You count effort. You measure outcomes. The mind asks, "Why them and not me?" Or, "Why did this happen when I did everything right?" These questions don't lead to clarity. They trap attention in resistance. Instead of adapting, the mind argues with reality, and reality never argues back. The belief in fairness also keeps emotional wounds open longer than necessary. Pain is one thing, feeling wronged is another. When you frame experiences through fairness, pain becomes personal. It feels targeted. This deepens resentment. You're no longer dealing with what happened, but with what should have happened. And the gap between those two becomes a source of ongoing suffering. There's also a hidden loss of power here. When you believe fairness should protect you, disappointment feels like betrayal. You feel owed something: closure, recognition, an apology. When it doesn't arrive, the mind waits. It stays alert, scanning for balance to be restored. But waiting for fairness is waiting for something external to regulate your inner state. That waiting drains energy and delays acceptance. Letting go of the fairness illusion doesn't mean becoming bitter or cynical. It means becoming realistic. It means understanding that fairness is a human value, not a universal rule. Some people benefit without effort. Some struggle despite integrity. Some lessons arrive without explanation. When you accept this, the mind stops fighting what it cannot change. And in that release, freedom appears. There is a surprising calm that comes from no longer needing life to justify itself. When you stop asking why things should be different, attention returns to what is actually happening. You move from judgment to response. Instead of feeling trapped by unfairness, you ask quieter, more useful questions. What can I learn here? What is within my control now? How do I move forward with dignity? The illusion of fairness also affects relationships deeply. Expecting people to behave fairly often leads to disappointment. People act from their wounds, fears, and desires. They don't always reflect effort with effort or care with care. When you expect symmetry, you feel hurt when it doesn't appear. But when you release that expectation, you interact with people as they are, not as they should be. This reduces conflict and emotional exhaustion. This shift strengthens emotional neutrality. Neutrality without realism can feel fragile. But when neutrality is paired with acceptance of life's imbalance, it becomes stable. You stop being shocked by inconsistency. You stop being pulled into emotional reactions by unmet expectations. You conserve energy for what truly matters. There is also a deeper maturity that grows here. You begin to act ethically, not because you expect fairness in return, but because it aligns with who you choose to be. Your values stop depending on outcomes. Integrity becomes internal, not transactional. This creates inner consistency, even when external circumstances are chaotic. At night, the mind rests more easily without fairness calculations. There's less mental accounting, fewer arguments with the past. Sleep comes without the need to resolve every imbalance. The body relaxes because it's no longer waiting for justice before allowing peace. Understanding this illusion doesn't make life easier in every moment, but it makes it lighter. You stop carrying the extra weight of expectation. You stop interpreting randomness as personal failure. You stop demanding explanations that may never come. And as this understanding deepens, control quietly returns to where it belongs. Not in shaping outcomes, not in enforcing fairness, but in choosing how you relate to what unfolds. When the mind releases its demand for balance, it regains its balance. As the mind loosens its grip on fairness, another distinction becomes clear. Not everything that affects you deserves access to your inner state. Some things belong outside. Some storms were never meant to live in your chest. When this understanding settles, you begin to sense the difference between what happens around you and what happens within you. There is a quiet confusion many people live with for years. They treat the world as if it controls their inner life. A bad day becomes a bad mood. Someone else's anger becomes their anxiety. A change in circumstances becomes a change in identity. Slowly, without noticing, the external climate starts dictating the internal weather, and that is where peace quietly erodes. The external climate is always shifting. People change their minds, plans fall apart, news arrives uninvited, delays happen, loss appears. None of this asks for permission. If your inner world depends on outer conditions, then calm becomes rare and fragile. You are constantly adjusting, bracing, reacting. Life feels like something that happens to you, not something you move through. Internal weather is different. It is the emotional and mental state you carry regardless of conditions. It includes your baseline calm, your resilience, your ability to stay centered when things move. This weather can be trained. It can be softened. It can become steady, but only if you stop handing it over to what you cannot control. Many people confuse awareness with absorption. They believe being sensitive means feeling everything fully. But sensitivity without boundaries becomes overwhelm. You don't need to absorb every mood in a room to understand it. You don't need to internalize every problem to respond wisely. When you let the external climate flood your inner space, you lose clarity. When you keep a boundary, you gain perspective. This boundary does not make you distant. It makes you grounded. You can acknowledge difficulty without becoming it. You can recognize tension without carrying it home. You can care without collapsing inward. This is the difference between living reactively and living deliberately. The body plays a major role here. When external events trigger stress, the body responds as if danger is constant. Muscles tighten, breathing shortens, sleep suffers. Over time, this creates a state of chronic alertness. The body never fully rests because the mind never fully separates what is happening from who you are. Learning to stabilize your internal weather tells the body it is safe, even when circumstances are uncertain. This skill changes how you move through days. A stressful conversation no longer defines the evening. A setback doesn't ruin the week. You stop carrying emotional residue from one moment into the next. This doesn't mean you forget. It means you process and release. You allow events to pass through instead of settling inside. One of the most freeing realizations is this: you are allowed to be okay even when things are not. This goes against much of what we're taught. We're told calm must be earned, that peace comes after resolution, that rest is only allowed when everything is handled. But that belief keeps the nervous system in waiting mode. When you learn to separate internal weather from external climate, peace becomes a choice, not a reward. This also strengthens decision-making. When your inner state is stable, you respond instead of react. You choose actions based on values, not emotional pressure. You stop rushing to fix, defend, or escape. Clarity grows because the mind is not clouded by emotional storms borrowed from outside. There is also a deeper sense of identity that forms. You stop defining yourself by circumstances. You are no longer the stressed one, the unlucky one, or the overwhelmed one. You become someone who experiences stress, luck, and overwhelm without being consumed by them. This shift may sound subtle, but it changes everything. At night, this separation becomes even more important. External climate fades when the day ends, but internal weather often lingers. Thoughts replay, emotions surface. The body stays tense. But when you practice this distinction during the day, the night becomes gentler. The mind doesn't feel responsible for holding the world together. Sleep becomes a place of recovery, not rumination. This is not about pretending everything is fine. It's about choosing where you live mentally. You can acknowledge chaos without letting it take residence. You can stay informed without being inflamed. You can engage with life without being tossed around by it. As this understanding deepens, something shifts quietly but permanently. You stop waking up emotionally dependent on what the day might bring. You carry a steadiness with you. The external climate still changes, storms still pass, but your internal weather becomes less reactive, more stable, more yours. And that is where real control begins, not in predicting the world, but in protecting the inner space where your life is actually lived. As that inner stability grows, another hidden source of disturbance starts to surface. Even when the mind is calmer, even when the inner weather is steady, something still has the power to unsettle it. Not events themselves, but the quiet predictions attached to them, the assumptions, the hopes, the silent rules about how things should unfold. This is where expectation lives. Expectation often disguises itself as optimism or preparation. It feels harmless, even helpful. You expect effort to be noticed. You expect people to act consistently. You expect situations to follow logic. But expectation is not neutral. It is a mental contract with the future. And when the future doesn't sign it, the mind feels betrayed. Emotional suffering doesn't usually come from what happens. It comes from the gap between what happens and what you expected to happen. The event may be small, but the disappointment feels large because it collides with an inner script. When reality breaks that script, emotions rush in to fill the space. Frustration, sadness, anger, confusion. Not because the moment was unbearable, but because it was unexpected. The mind loves certainty. Expectation gives the illusion of control. It creates a sense of safety by predicting outcomes. But life rarely follows prediction. People change. Circumstances shift. Timing moves differently than planned. When expectation becomes rigid, it turns into resistance. You stop meeting life as it is and start arguing with how it should be. This resistance keeps the nervous system active. The body reacts as if something has gone wrong, even when nothing dangerous has occurred. Heart rate increases. Thoughts speed up. The mind searches for explanations. Over time, this repeated pattern trains the body to live in tension. It's not the event that creates exhaustion. It's the constant mismatch between expectation and reality. Expectation also complicates relationships. You expect understanding without saying what you need. You expect consistency without accepting change. You expect others to meet you where you are emotionally, even when they are elsewhere. When they don't, disappointment feels personal. You may feel unseen or unappreciated, even if no harm was intended. Expectations turn ordinary human behavior into emotional wounds. There's another subtle effect. Expectations create attachment to outcomes. You begin to measure moments against imagined futures. If things go as expected, you feel relief. If they don't, you feel loss. This keeps emotional well-being tied to conditions. Peace becomes conditional. Happiness becomes fragile. You are constantly waiting for life to line up before allowing yourself to rest. Letting go of expectation does not mean becoming hopeless or passive. It means shifting from prediction to presence. You still plan, you still hope, but you hold outcomes lightly. You stop demanding that reality match your mental image. This creates emotional flexibility. When things change, you adapt instead of collapse. There is freedom in this flexibility. Without expectation, you meet moments fresh. You respond to what is actually happening, not what you rehearsed. You listen better. You notice more. You become less reactive because you are less surprised. Acceptance replaces shock. Curiosity replaces disappointment. Expectation also affects how you treat yourself. You expect progress to be linear, healing to be fast, growth to be visible. When it isn't, you judge yourself. You feel behind. You feel like you're failing. But growth often moves quietly and unevenly. When you release expectation, self-compassion grows. You allow yourself to move at a human pace. At night, expectation often turns into mental replay. You review what didn't happen, what should have gone differently, what you hoped for. This keeps the mind active when it should be resting. But when expectations soften, the mind releases its grip on the day. Sleep becomes easier because there is nothing left to resolve. This doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you care without attachment. You engage without demanding control. You stay open without bracing for disappointment. This balance is subtle but powerful. It allows joy to arrive without pressure and pain to pass without resistance. One of the most grounding realizations is this: life does not owe you consistency. It offers experience. When you stop expecting it to perform according to your rules, you stop feeling wronged by its unpredictability. You begin to work with reality instead of against it. As this understanding settles, emotional suffering loses one of its strongest roots. The mind no longer tightens around the future. It stays closer to the present. And in the present, most moments are manageable. Most moments are enough. Releasing expectation does not make life smaller. It makes it lighter. You stop carrying imagined futures into every experience. You stop demanding guarantees before allowing peace. And slowly, quietly, emotional freedom becomes less about controlling outcomes and more about accepting what unfolds without losing yourself in the process. As expectations loosen their hold, a natural question rises quietly in the background. If you stop clinging, stop expecting, stop attaching your peace to outcomes, what happens to connection, to love, to care? Many people fear that detachment means becoming distant, numb, or emotionally unavailable. But real detachment is not the absence of feeling. It is the absence of entanglement. Coldness closes the heart. Detachment clears it. Coldness is a defense. It forms when emotions feel overwhelming or unsafe. The mind decides it's better not to feel at all than to feel too much. Detachment is different. Detachment keeps the heart open while freeing it from dependency. You still care, but you no longer cling. You still love, but you no longer lose yourself inside another person's reactions, moods, or choices. Most emotional pain comes not from caring, but from over-identifying. You attach your sense of worth to how others respond. You attach your peace to whether things go your way. You attach your identity to roles you play for others. Detachment gently removes these hooks. It doesn't cut connection. It removes ownership. This shift begins internally. You start noticing when your mood rises and falls based on someone else's behavior, when their silence creates anxiety, when their approval creates relief, when their disappointment feels like a personal failure. These are signs of attachment, not love. Attachment says, I need this to be okay, so I can be okay. Detachment says, I can be okay regardless. Detachment without coldness allows you to be present without absorbing. You can listen deeply without taking responsibility for fixing. You can support without sacrificing your stability. You can empathize without drowning in someone else's emotions. This creates healthier relationships because it removes pressure. People feel less managed, less needed, less controlled. They feel respected as individuals. There is also a deep respect for self that grows here. When you are detached, you no longer betray your values to keep peace. You don't shrink to be accepted. You don't overextend to be loved. You allow others to have their reactions without adjusting your center to accommodate them. This creates emotional integrity. You feel whole because you are no longer split between who you are and who you think you need to be. Many confuse detachment with indifference. Indifference says, "I don't care." Detachment says, "I care, but I am not owned by this." Indifference avoids engagement. Detachment allows engagement without self-loss. This distinction matters because indifference isolates, while detachment stabilizes. Detachment also brings emotional clarity. When you're attached, emotions blur perception. You interpret events through fear of loss or desire for control. When detached, you see more accurately. You recognize when a situation requires action and when it requires patience. You stop forcing outcomes and start responding wisely. This makes your presence calmer and your choices cleaner. The nervous system responds strongly to this shift. Attachment keeps the body in a constant state of alert. You're always scanning for signs of approval or rejection. Detachment tells the body it no longer needs to monitor everything. Safety returns. Breathing deepens. Muscles relax. Sleep improves. The body finally rests because it's no longer guarding emotional territory. This practice also transforms how you experience conflict. When you're detached, disagreement doesn't feel like a threat. You don't need to defend your identity or prove your worth. You can listen without preparing a counterattack. You can speak without trying to control the outcome. Conflict becomes a conversation instead of a battle. At night, detachment softens mental noise. You stop replaying interactions, wondering what you should have said or how things could have gone differently. You accept what has already happened. This acceptance doesn't erase memory, but it removes emotional charge. The mind settles more easily because it's no longer holding unfinished emotional business. Detachment without coldness also deepens compassion. When you're no longer entangled, you can see others more clearly. You recognize their behavior as a reflection of their inner state, not a verdict on your worth. This reduces resentment. You stop taking things personally. You forgive more easily, not because you excuse harm, but because you no longer need to carry it. This doesn't mean you tolerate everything. Detachment strengthens boundaries. You become clearer about what you allow and what you don't. You walk away without drama. You say no without guilt. You choose distance when necessary without hatred. This is quiet strength. Over time, detachment reshapes identity. You stop defining yourself through roles, relationships, or outcomes. You become rooted internally. Life still moves. People still come and go. Emotions still rise and fall. But you remain intact. And this is where true connection lives. Not in clinging, not in control, not in emotional dependence, but in freedom. When you no longer need others to complete you, you can finally meet them fully, calmly, honestly, without fear. Detachment without coldness is not withdrawal from life. It is the ability to stay open without being pulled apart. And as this becomes natural, you realize something profound. The less you cling, the deeper you can truly care. As detachment becomes more natural, another pattern quietly comes into view. It hides behind logic, principles, and strong opinions. It often feels justified, even virtuous. Yet it has the power to disturb inner peace faster than most emotions. This is the hidden addiction to being right. It doesn't announce itself loudly. It shows up as a tight feeling when someone disagrees, a restless urge to correct, a need to explain one more time, a mental replay of conversations where you prove your point again and again. Being right feels stabilizing to the ego. It creates a sense of control in an uncertain world. But that stability is fragile because it depends on others seeing things your way. The mind becomes attached to its conclusions. Thoughts turn into identity, Opinions harden into self-image. When someone challenges them, it doesn't feel like a discussion. It feels like a threat. The body reacts. The chest tightens. The tone changes. Even silence can feel unbearable when you believe you are right and misunderstood. This addiction keeps the nervous system active. Being right requires vigilance. You listen not to understand, but to respond. You wait for openings. You collect evidence. Conversations become arenas instead of exchanges. Even when you win an argument, something feels off. There's tension instead of relief, distance instead of connection, because being right often costs more than it gives. The deeper cost is internal. When the mind is busy defending its position, it cannot be at ease. There is always something to prove, something to fix, someone to correct. Peace becomes conditional on agreement, and agreement is never guaranteed. This keeps the mind restless, scanning for threats to its certainty. Being right also limits growth. When you are attached to your perspective, new information feels inconvenient. You filter what you hear. You dismiss what doesn't match your view. This protects the ego, but it starves wisdom. Learning requires openness. Growth requires humility. Being right closes both. In relationships, this pattern slowly erodes closeness. People stop sharing openly when they feel corrected. Conversations become guarded. Emotional distance grows, not because of conflict, but because of subtle invalidation. Even when your logic is sound, the emotional cost can be high. Being right may win the point, but it often loses the moment. This habit often develops early. Many were rewarded for intelligence, accuracy, or strong opinions. Being right became a source of worth. Over time, the mind learned to cling to it. Letting go now can feel like losing ground. But what you're actually releasing is not intelligence, but rigidity. There is a difference between clarity and certainty. Clarity is flexible. It adjusts when new information appears. Certainty is rigid. It resists change. The addiction to being right thrives on certainty. It fears uncertainty because uncertainty feels like weakness. But in truth, uncertainty is honest. It allows space. It allows dialogue. It allows peace. Letting go of the need to be right does not mean abandoning truth. It means releasing attachment to proving it. You can hold your perspective without forcing it. You can share without insisting. You can listen without preparing a defense. This creates ease in the body and openness in the mind. There is also relief here. When you no longer need to be right, you don't carry conversations home with you. You don't rehearse explanations at night. You don't replay moments where you could have said something better. The mind rests because it no longer needs validation. This shift changes how conflict feels. Disagreement becomes information, not insult. You stop equating difference with danger. You become curious instead of reactive. This doesn't make you passive. It makes you grounded. You choose when to speak and when to let silence do the work. The body responds quickly to this release. Shoulders drop, breathing deepens, tension fades. The nervous system senses safety because there is nothing to defend. Sleep improves because the mind is not busy protecting identity. There is also a quiet confidence that grows. When you don't need to be right, you don't feel small when questioned. You don't feel diminished by disagreement. Your sense of self is no longer built on mental positions. It is built on presence. This confidence is calm, not performative. It doesn't seek approval. Letting go of this addiction strengthens detachment without coldness. You remain engaged without entanglement. You care about truth without clinging to it as a weapon. You value understanding over victory. This makes interactions lighter and more honest. Over time, something surprising happens. People listen to you more when you stop forcing your point. Your words carry more weight because they are not loaded with urgency. Silence becomes powerful because it is chosen, not imposed. And slowly the mind learns a new form of freedom. You realize that peace was never found in being correct. It was found in being clear without attachment, calm without dominance, presence without the need to win. When the need to be right fades, the mind finally relaxes. There is nothing left to defend, nothing left to prove. Just awareness, steady and open, moving through life without the burden of constant justification. As the need to be right softens, another realization settles in quietly. You begin to notice how much energy was spent trying to influence others, situations, outcomes. And in that noticing, a deeper truth appears. The most powerful influence you will ever have is over yourself. Everything else is secondary. Power is often misunderstood. It's associated with authority, control, dominance, or visibility. But those forms of power depend on conditions. They rise and fall with circumstance, with approval, with position. Self-command is different. It does not rely on permission. It does not fade when circumstances change. It is the ability to govern your inner world regardless of what is happening around you. Self-command begins with restraint, the ability to pause before acting, to notice an impulse without obeying it, to feel anger without becoming it, to experience fear without letting it decide. This restraint is not repression. It is choice, and choice is where power lives. Most people are driven by unconscious patterns, habits of reaction formed over years. When something triggers them, the response is automatic. Words spill out. Emotions take over. Regret follows. Self-command interrupts this cycle. It inserts awareness between impulse and action. In that space, you regain authorship of your behavior. This kind of power is quiet. It doesn't announce itself, but it's deeply felt. You notice it when you don't say the thing that would escalate a situation, when you don't chase validation, when you don't act from insecurity. Each of these moments strengthens internal authority. You trust yourself more because you see that you can hold steady under pressure. Self-command also protects dignity. When you act impulsively, you often give parts of yourself away. You explain too much. You defend unnecessarily. You react in ways that don't align with who you want to be. Self-command keeps you aligned. Your actions reflect your values, not your emotions. This creates inner coherence. You feel whole instead of fragmented. There is also a deep sense of safety that comes from this mastery. When you know you can regulate yourself, the world feels less threatening. You don't fear difficult conversations as much. You don't fear conflict or uncertainty in the same way. You trust your ability to respond wisely. This trust calms the nervous system and grounds the mind. Self-command changes how you experience desire as well. You still want things. You still have goals. But you are no longer driven by urgency. You can delay gratification. You can sit with discomfort without escaping it. This builds resilience. You stop being pulled by every craving or avoidance impulse. You choose direction over relief. This power also reshapes relationships. When you have self-command, you don't rely on others to regulate your emotions. You don't expect them to calm you, reassure you, or complete you. This removes pressure. Interactions become cleaner. You show up as a whole person, not as someone seeking emotional regulation through others. There is a misconception that self-command makes life rigid or joyless. In reality, it creates freedom. When you're no longer controlled by impulses, you can fully enjoy moments without clinging. Pleasure becomes cleaner, rest becomes deeper, joy becomes more stable because it's not followed by guilt or overindulgence. At night, self-command shows its value clearly. The mind doesn't spiral as easily. You don't replay the day endlessly. You don't get dragged into emotional loops. You can guide attention gently toward rest. Sleep comes not because everything is resolved, but because you can let go. This mastery takes practice. It's built in small moments, not grand gestures. Choosing silence instead of reaction. Choosing patience instead of force. Choosing reflection instead of impulse. Each choice strengthens the muscle of command. Over time, what once felt difficult becomes natural. Self-command also brings humility. You stop trying to control what cannot be controlled. You focus on what is actually yours. Thoughts, actions, responses. This focus simplifies life. You stop wasting energy on battles you can't win. You stop resisting reality. You work with what is. There is a quiet confidence that comes with this. Not arrogance, not dominance, just steadiness. You don't need to prove strength because you feel it. You don't need to assert power because you embody it. Others sense this, not consciously, but intuitively. Calm authority changes how people respond to you. As this understanding deepens, you begin to see power differently. It's no longer about influence over others. It's about sovereignty over self, the ability to remain centered when provoked, the ability to act with intention, the ability to choose peace without weakness. And this is why self-command stands above all other forms of power. It cannot be taken from you. It does not depend on circumstances. It does not require permission. It travels with you into every moment, every interaction, every quiet night. When you master yourself, the world loses its grip. Not because it becomes easier, but because you become stronger in the ways that matter. As self-command becomes steadier, another pattern quietly reveals itself. You start to feel where your energy really goes, not just into actions or responsibilities, but into something far more exhausting and far less visible. The constant inner pushing against what already is. This is mental resistance, and it drains more life from you than effort ever could. Mental resistance happens when the mind refuses to accept the present moment, when it argues with reality instead of responding to it. A situation unfolds, and instead of meeting it, the mind tightens. This shouldn't be happening. They shouldn't have said that. I shouldn't feel this way. It should be different by now. These thoughts seem harmless, but they create friction, and friction consumes energy. The body feels this immediately. Resistance activates stress without action, muscles tense without movement, breathing shortens without danger. The nervous system prepares for a fight that never comes. This is why resistance is so tiring. You are burning fuel without going anywhere. The mind runs, but nothing changes. Much of this resistance is unconscious. It's a habit learned over time. We're taught to push discomfort away, to fix emotions quickly, to judge ourselves for feeling anything unwanted. So when sadness appears, the mind resists it. When uncertainty appears, the mind resists it. When life feels slow, unfair, or unclear, the mind resists it. But resistance doesn't remove discomfort. It multiplies it. Pain is a natural part of experience. Resistance turns pain into suffering. The moment you say, "This shouldn't be happening," the experience doubles. There is the feeling itself, and then there is the struggle against it. The struggle is what exhausts you. The feeling alone often passes more quickly than you expect, when it is allowed to exist. Mental resistance also traps attention in the past or future. You resist what already happened by replaying it, wishing it were different. You resist what hasn't happened yet by worrying, planning, bracing. Very little resistance happens in the present moment itself, and the longer the mind stays away from the present, the more disconnected you feel from your own life. This resistance often hides behind productivity. You stay busy to avoid feeling. You push forward to avoid pausing, but the body keeps score. Fatigue builds. Irritability grows. Sleep becomes shallow. The mind feels crowded because it never fully releases anything. Everything is held in tension. There is also resistance toward yourself. You resist your pace, your limitations, your emotions. You judge yourself for not being further along, calmer, stronger. This internal resistance creates self-conflict. Part of you feels, another part attacks the feeling. This splits energy inward. Instead of being used to live, it's used to manage inner battles. Letting go of resistance does not mean giving up. It means stopping the unnecessary fight. It means acknowledging what is present without labeling it as a failure. Acceptance is not approval. It is recognition. When you recognize reality clearly, you can respond effectively. When you resist it, you stay stuck. There is a noticeable shift when resistance drops. The body softens, breathing deepens, thoughts slow. This doesn't mean problems vanish. It means you stop adding weight to them. Action becomes cleaner because it's not fueled by frustration. Decisions feel simpler because they're not rushed by urgency. Mental resistance also affects how you rest. Even when you stop moving, the mind keeps pushing, replaying, planning, correcting. This is why rest often doesn't restore. The body is still in effort mode. When resistance eases, rest becomes real. Sleep deepens because the mind is no longer arguing with the day. This practice is subtle. It begins by noticing when you are saying no internally to what is already happening. A feeling, a thought, a situation. Instead of tightening, you soften. Instead of pushing away, you allow. Not forever, just long enough for clarity to return. Often the need to resist disappears once the moment is fully felt. There is also a return of energy. When you stop fighting reality, energy that was trapped in tension becomes available. Focus improves. Presence increases. You feel more alive, not because life is easier, but because you are no longer draining yourself from the inside. Resistance often feels like strength because it feels active. Acceptance feels passive by comparison. But acceptance is not passive. It is precise. It allows you to see clearly. And clarity is what makes effective action possible. You stop reacting blindly and start responding intelligently. Over time, this changes how life feels. You move with moments instead of against them. You adapt instead of exhaust. You conserve energy for what truly matters. The mind becomes less crowded because it's no longer pushing against every discomfort. And as this becomes familiar, a deeper calm emerges. Not forced, not fragile, just present. You realize that much of what tired you was never the world. It was the constant inner resistance to it. When resistance ends, energy returns. And with that energy comes space. Space to breathe, space to choose, space to rest. And in that space, control becomes effortless, because there is nothing left to fight. As resistance releases its grip, something unexpected happens. The body feels lighter, the mind quieter. And yet, a new fear often rises in that openness. If you stop controlling so tightly, what keeps life from drifting? If you stop managing every detail, what keeps things from falling apart? This is where many people hesitate. They confuse control with direction, not realizing they are very different forces. Control is rigid. It demands certainty. It tries to lock outcomes into place before life has finished unfolding. Direction is softer. It knows where it's going, but it adapts how it gets there. Control clenches. Direction guides. When you rely on control, you exhaust yourself trying to hold reality still. When you rely on direction, you move with reality without losing your path. Letting go of control does not mean giving up intention. It means releasing the belief that you must micromanage every step for things to work out. Much of what we call control is actually fear in disguise. Fear of uncertainty, fear of mistakes, fear of losing identity if plans change. When you loosen control, those fears surface briefly, but once they pass, clarity replaces them. There is a quiet intelligence that emerges when you stop forcing outcomes. You become more responsive. You notice timing. You sense when to act and when to wait. Control rushes. Direction listens. Control demands progress. Direction trusts pacing. This shift doesn't slow you down. It aligns you. One of the greatest drains of control is its constant monitoring. You check, adjust, recheck. You anticipate problems before they exist. You rehearse conversations. You manage perceptions. This keeps the mind tense and the body alert. Direction doesn't require this vigilance. It sets an intention and then pays attention. When something shifts, it responds calmly instead of panicking. Letting go of control also restores creativity. Control narrows focus. It insists on one right way. Direction opens possibilities. When you're not obsessed with a single outcome, you see alternatives. Solutions appear that control would have blocked. Flexibility becomes strength instead of weakness. There is also a deeper trust that forms. Not blind trust, but grounded trust in your ability to adjust. You realize you don't need to predict everything to handle anything. This realization reduces anxiety. The mind stops racing ahead. It stays closer to the present, where your actual power lives. Direction is rooted in values, not outcomes. You may not know exactly how things will unfold, but you know who you want to be as they do. You know the qualities you want to bring into each situation. Integrity, patience, honesty, care. These guide you even when plans dissolve. Control focuses on results. Direction focuses on alignment. This shift also changes how failure feels. When you're controlling, failure feels catastrophic. It means something went wrong. It threatens identity. When you're guided by direction, failure becomes feedback. Information, a redirection rather than a collapse. You learn without self-punishment. You adjust without panic. Relationships benefit deeply from this. Control tries to manage others' reactions. Direction sets boundaries and communicates clearly, then allows people to respond as they will. This removes emotional strain. You stop taking responsibility for how others feel. You show up honestly and let the rest unfold. The nervous system responds with relief. Control keeps the body braced. Direction allows relaxation. Breathing becomes deeper. Muscles soften. Sleep improves because the mind no longer feels responsible for holding everything together. You rest because you trust that life will continue without constant supervision. At night, this difference is especially clear. Control replays the day, looking for errors. Direction reflects gently, then lets go. The mind knows it did what it could with what it had. This allows true rest, not collapse, but restoration. Letting go of control also reveals a deeper rhythm. Life moves in waves, not straight lines. Control resists this. Direction flows with it. When things slow down, you don't force momentum. When opportunities appear, you don't hesitate out of fear. You move when it's time, rest when it's not. This doesn't mean passivity. Direction still involves action, but action comes from clarity, not compulsion. You act because it aligns, not because you're afraid of losing control. This makes effort sustainable. You don't burn out chasing certainty. Over time, you begin to feel guided rather than driven. Life feels less like a constant problem to solve and more like a path to walk. You still choose, you still decide, but you no longer fight the terrain. Letting go of control without losing direction is one of the deepest forms of maturity. It means you trust your inner compass more than rigid plans. You trust awareness more than force. You trust yourself enough to move forward without gripping the wheel too tightly. And as this becomes natural, something settles deeply. You realize you were never meant to control life. You were meant to participate in it with clarity, presence, and intention. When control loosens and direction remains, peace no longer depends on things going your way. It depends on you staying aligned as they unfold. This is where effort turns into ease, where movement becomes natural, where rest becomes safe, and where true control reveals itself, not as force, but as quiet guidance from within. As direction replaces force, relationships begin to look different. The same habits that once felt necessary now feel heavy. You notice how often tension came from trying to manage outcomes between people, trying to keep things smooth, trying to prevent conflict, trying to shape how someone feels, thinks, or behaves. And slowly, it becomes clear that much of what we call relationship effort is actually control wearing a softer mask. Control in relationships often begins with good intentions. You want harmony, you want understanding, you want to avoid pain. So you explain more than necessary. You adjust yourself to keep peace. You guide conversations toward safer ground. You anticipate reactions and change your behavior in advance. It feels responsible, mature, loving. But underneath, it carries a quiet belief. If I manage this well enough, I can prevent discomfort. This belief creates pressure, not always obvious, but constant. You become alert to shifts in tone. You read between lines. You try to fix misunderstandings before they fully form. Over time, relationships stop feeling organic. They start feeling monitored. And even when things look calm on the surface, the inner tension grows. The myth of control in relationships is the idea that closeness depends on careful management, that love requires constant adjustment, that stability comes from preventing problems instead of allowing honesty. But real connection doesn't come from control. It comes from presence, from allowing people to be who they are, even when it's uncomfortable. Trying to control relational outcomes often leads to self-erasure. You soften your needs. You delay boundaries. You say yes when you mean no. You become skilled at keeping things together, but less skilled at being fully yourself. This creates imbalance. One person carries emotional responsibility while the other remains unchanged. Resentment quietly builds, not because the relationship is broken, but because it's being held together by force. Control also blocks truth. When you manage reactions, people don't show you who they really are. They show you what fits the space you've created. This gives a false sense of security. You believe things are fine because conflict is low. But clarity is also low. And without clarity, intimacy becomes shallow. Letting go of control does not mean letting relationships fall apart. It means allowing them to be real. Real includes disagreement. Real includes misunderstanding. Real includes moments of distance. These are not signs of failure. They are signs of authenticity. When you stop controlling, you create space for honesty to surface. There is fear here. If you stop managing, what if things change? What if people leave? What if conflict increases? These fears reveal the hidden bargain of control. You trade authenticity for predictability. But predictability without truth is fragile. It holds only as long as the effort continues. When you release control, relationships may shift. Some become stronger, others grow quieter, some may end. This is not loss caused by detachment. It is clarity revealed by it. Relationships that require control to survive often cannot sustain honesty. Letting go simply shows what was already true. Healthy relationships don't need constant steering. They adjust naturally. Each person takes responsibility for their own emotions. Communication becomes cleaner because it's not filtered through fear. Boundaries become clearer because they're expressed, not hinted. You stop trying to keep others comfortable at the expense of your own stability. This shift also changes how you listen. You stop listening to respond, fix, or calm. You listen to understand. And when you speak without trying to control the outcome. You say what is true and allow others to have their reaction. This is not indifference, it is respect. The body responds strongly to this release. Control keeps the nervous system alert. You're always scanning for emotional shifts. When control drops, the body relaxes. You no longer feel responsible for managing emotional weather that isn't yours. This creates relief. You feel lighter in interactions, more present, less tense. There is also a return of self-trust. When you're not trying to control relationships, you trust your ability to respond if something goes wrong. You don't need to prevent every problem because you know you can handle discomfort when it arises. This confidence changes how you show up. You're calmer because you're no longer guarding against every possible outcome. Letting go of relational control does not mean tolerating harm. Boundaries become more important, not less. You stop negotiating your limits silently. You state them clearly. And if they are not respected, you respond with action, not argument. Control tries to force change. Boundaries accept reality and protect space. Over time, relationships become simpler, not easier, but cleaner. You stop carrying emotional weight that isn't yours. You stop managing dynamics you can't own. You allow connection to grow where it can and release it where it can't. This is where real intimacy begins, not in perfect harmony, but in mutual responsibility. Each person accountable for their inner world. Each person free to be real. Control dissolves, and in its place, trust has room to breathe. And as this understanding settles, you see the myth clearly. Relationships were never meant to be controlled. They were meant to be experienced. When you stop gripping them, you don't lose direction. You gain truth. As relationships release their grip and the need to manage others fades, attention naturally turns inward again. Not to fix, not to judge, but to notice what remains when the day finally ends. Because even when the world grows quiet, the inner world often stays active. Thoughts drift, emotions surface. The body lies still, but the mind keeps moving. This is where emotional self-regulation reveals one of its most overlooked roles, not as a daytime discipline, but as a sleep skill. Sleep is not only about rest, it is about regulation. The quality of your sleep reflects how safely your nervous system feels when it no longer has distractions. During the day, emotions are often managed through action, conversation, and movement. At night, there is nothing left to do but feel. Whatever hasn't been processed gently rises to the surface. This is why unresolved emotions often wait for bedtime. Many people think they struggle with sleep because of habits, screens, or schedules. But often, the real issue is emotional overflow. The mind is still holding the day. Conversations replay. Tension lingers in the body. Worries stretch into the future. Emotional self-regulation teaches the mind and body how to downshift instead of staying alert. Regulation does not mean forcing calm. It means guiding the nervous system out of activation. When emotions are ignored during the day, they demand attention at night. When emotions are fought, they resist rest. Regulation begins with allowing the body to feel heavy, allowing the breath to slow naturally, allowing thoughts to pass without engagement. One of the most powerful skills is learning not to follow every thought that appears before sleep. Thoughts are not instructions, they are signals. At night, many of them are simply the brain releasing stored information. When you don't engage, they lose momentum. When you follow them, they turn into stories. Stories keep the nervous system awake. Emotional self-regulation teaches you to notice sensations instead of narratives. The feeling of the bed, the rhythm of breathing, the warmth in the chest. These sensations anchor awareness in the body where safety is felt, not argued. The mind relaxes when attention returns to physical presence. There is also a subtle shift in how emotions are treated. Instead of labeling them as problems to solve, they are treated as waves to pass through. Sadness, restlessness, or uncertainty don't need answers at midnight. They need permission to exist without resistance. When emotions are allowed without judgment, they soften. This softness signals the body that it is safe to rest. This skill builds over time. Each night becomes a practice, not a performance. You stop trying to fall asleep and start allowing sleep to arrive. The difference is subtle but important. Trying activates effort. Allowing invites rest. Emotional regulation reduces effort. There is also a trust that develops. Trust that you don't need to resolve everything before sleeping. Trust that clarity can wait. Trust that the mind will reorganize itself when given space. This trust calms the urge to stay awake and monitor thoughts. Sleep becomes deeper because the nervous system is no longer scanning for unresolved threats. Emotional self-regulation tells the body that nothing needs immediate attention. Heart rate slows, muscles release, breathing becomes steady. The transition into sleep feels natural rather than forced. Over time, this practice changes how emotions are handled during the day as well. When you know that emotions can be regulated and released at night, you stop fearing them. You stop suppressing them. You let them move through you instead of storing them. This creates a lighter inner world. Nighttime regulation also affects memory and identity. Sleep is when the brain integrates experiences. If emotions are highly charged, memories stay fragmented. When emotions are regulated, experiences are integrated smoothly. You wake up feeling clearer, not because life changed, but because your relationship with it did. There is a quiet confidence that comes from this. You no longer dread bedtime. You no longer fear your own thoughts. Night becomes a place of restoration instead of confrontation. The mind learns that it doesn't need to stay vigilant. It learns how to let go. Emotional self-regulation as a sleep skill is not about perfection. Some nights will be restless. Some emotions will linger. But even then, you respond differently. With patience instead of frustration. With curiosity instead of judgment. This response alone reduces tension. As this becomes familiar, sleep stops being a struggle. It becomes a signal that the body trusts you, that the mind feels held, that inner control has softened into inner guidance, and in that quiet state, something deeper happens. The mind resets without effort. The emotional system recalibrates. You wake up not just rested, but regulated, ready to meet the world again, not with force, but with steadiness that begins and ends in the quiet of sleep. As emotional regulation settles into the body and nights grow quieter, a subtle change begins to show on the outside. Less urgency in your voice, fewer sharp movements, longer pauses. And without trying to project anything at all, you may notice something unexpected in others. A shift, more caution, more attention, sometimes even discomfort. Calm, when it is real, often unsettles people. Calm people are often misunderstood. Their stillness is mistaken for calculation. Their silence is read as hidden strength. Their lack of reaction feels unpredictable. In a world built on emotional signals, calm breaks the pattern. And what breaks patterns is often perceived as dangerous. Most social interactions run on emotional exchange. One person reacts, the other responds. Energy moves back and forth. When someone becomes upset, others mirror it or counter it. When someone seeks validation, it's usually met with reassurance or resistance. Calm disrupts this rhythm. It offers no fuel, no reflection, no escalation, and when there is nothing to grab onto, people feel exposed. This discomfort doesn't come from threat. It comes from uncertainty. Calm people are hard to read. Their inner state isn't leaking outward. You can't tell if they agree or disagree, if they are affected or untouched. This ambiguity makes others uneasy because it removes predictability. Predictability feels safe. Calm removes it. There is also a deeper reason. Calm suggests self-command. It implies that a person is not driven by impulse or emotion. In environments where power is usually expressed through force, volume, or intensity, this kind of control feels intimidating. It signals that pressure won't work, provocation won't work, emotional manipulation won't work, and when common tools fail, people feel disarmed. Calm people also reflect others back to themselves. When someone is emotional and receives calm in return, they become more aware of their own state. There is no distraction, no escalation to hide behind. This can feel uncomfortable, even confronting. Calm acts like a mirror, and not everyone wants to see what they are projecting. This is why calm is often misinterpreted as superiority or coldness. Not because calm people think they are above others, but because they are not participating in emotional chaos. To someone who relies on emotional exchange to feel seen or in control, calm feels like distance, or worse, dominance. There is also a biological layer. The nervous system reads calm as confidence. When someone remains regulated under pressure, the brain of the observer registers strength, not loud strength, but grounded strength. This triggers instinctive responses. Some people lean in, others pull back, some feel drawn, others feel threatened. Calm changes dynamics without saying a word. This is why calm people are often treated differently in conflict. Raised voices soften. Arguments lose steam. Provocations become awkward. Calm doesn't fight. It waits. And waiting shifts power. The person who does not rush to react controls the pace. They decide when and how energy moves. Calm also disrupts hierarchy. In many environments, power is associated with emotional dominance, the loudest voice, the strongest reaction. Calm refuses this currency. It does not compete, and in doing so, it quietly steps outside the system. This can feel destabilizing to those who rely on emotional display to assert position. It's important to understand that this perception is not something to perform. Forced calm is easily detected. It feels tense, controlled, rigid. Real calm is relaxed. It doesn't try to appear strong, it simply is. And that authenticity is what gives it weight. Calm people don't rush to explain themselves. They don't scramble for approval. They don't over-defend. This creates space, and in that space, others fill in meaning. Often, they project power because they can't find weakness. Silence becomes authority. Stillness becomes presence. This perception can create challenges. Calm people are sometimes misunderstood. They may be labeled distant, unengaged, or intimidating. But this is not a flaw. It is a signal that your internal regulation has shifted. You are no longer broadcasting every thought or emotion. You are no longer available to be pulled into every reaction. The key is not to shrink to make others comfortable. Calm is not something to apologize for. It is a natural result of inner mastery. Over time, the people who value depth and stability will recognize it. They will feel safe in it. Those who rely on chaos may drift away. This is not loss. It is alignment. Calm also protects you. When others perceive you as unreactive, they test less. They provoke less. They waste less energy trying to move you. Boundaries become implicit. You don't need to assert them loudly. Your presence does the work. At night, this calm deepens. The mind no longer needs to rehearse strength. The body doesn't stay alert. Sleep becomes fuller because there is nothing to prove, nothing to defend. Calm has already done its work. Understanding why calm is perceived as dangerous helps you stop questioning yourself. You realize it's not something you're doing wrong. It's something you've grown into. Calm doesn't announce power. It reveals it by absence. Absence of reactivity, absence of fear, absence of the need to dominate. And as this realization settles, you stop trying to explain your stillness. You let it speak on its own. Because calm, when genuine, needs no translation. It stands quietly, steady in a world that expects noise, and that quiet is exactly what makes it powerful. As calm becomes your natural state, another shift quietly follows. You stop looking outward so often. Not out of pride, not out of withdrawal, but because something inside you has settled into place. The constant checking fades. The subtle waiting for approval loosens, and you begin to feel the difference between being guided from within and being pulled from the outside. External validation is loud. It asks questions over and over. Was that okay? Did they like it? Did I say the right thing? Did I do enough? It keeps the mind turned outward, scanning faces, tones, reactions. It feels reassuring for a moment, but it never lasts. Approval fades, attention shifts, and the hunger returns. This cycle keeps you dependent on feedback you cannot control. Internal authority is quieter. It doesn't ask as much. It knows. It comes from alignment between your values and your actions. When what you do matches who you are, you don't need applause to feel steady. You feel settled even in silence. even in disagreement, even when no one notices. Many people confuse validation with connection. They believe being seen requires being approved of, but approval is unstable. It changes with moods, trends, and expectations. When your sense of worth depends on it, your inner state becomes fragile. You adjust yourself to fit rooms. You soften truth to keep peace. You perform instead of express. Over time, this creates exhaustion. You are always managing how you are perceived. Internal authority removes this strain. It doesn't mean you stop caring what others think. It means their opinions stop defining you. You listen, but you don't hand over control. You consider feedback, but you don't disappear inside it. You remain rooted even when perspectives differ. This shift changes how you speak. You stop over-explaining. You don't rush to justify choices. You allow pauses. Silence no longer feels like danger. You don't fill space to prove value. Your words become fewer but clearer. They carry weight because they're not fueled by insecurity. The body feels this change. When you seek validation, the nervous system stays alert. You're always watching for signs of acceptance or rejection. When authority moves inward, the body relaxes. Shoulders drop. Breathing deepens. There's nothing to monitor constantly. You're not waiting to be chosen. You're already present. Internal authority also changes how you handle criticism. When your worth is externally defined, criticism feels like collapse. When it's internally grounded, criticism becomes information. You can evaluate it without self-attack. You can take what's useful and release the rest. This creates emotional resilience. You stop fearing judgment because it no longer controls you. This doesn't make you rigid. In fact, it makes you more flexible. When you're not protecting ego, you can admit mistakes. You can change your mind. You can grow. External validation often locks people into roles. Internal authority allows evolution. You're not afraid to outgrow old versions of yourself because your foundation isn't approval, it's awareness. There is also a deeper peace here. You stop measuring yourself against others. Comparison loses its grip. You don't need to be ahead or admired to feel okay. You move at your own pace. You respect your own timing. This removes a quiet but constant source of stress that many people don't even realize they're carrying. At night, this difference becomes clear. The mind that depends on validation replays interactions, searching for signs. The mind rooted in internal authority rests more easily. There is less need to review, less need to correct. You trust that you showed up as yourself. That's enough. Internal authority also strengthens boundaries. When your sense of self is solid, you don't need to defend it aggressively. You say no without guilt. You walk away without drama. You don't argue to be understood. You allow others to have their opinions without making them yours. This shift can feel uncomfortable at first. Validation has been a compass for a long time. Letting it go can feel like stepping into open space. But that space is where clarity lives. You begin to hear your own inner voice again, not the loud one shaped by fear, but the steady one shaped by experience. As this voice strengthens, decisions become simpler. You don't crowd your mind with what others might think. You ask quieter questions. Does this align with me? Is this honest? Is this necessary? These questions lead to cleaner choices and fewer regrets. Over time, people respond differently to you. Some may offer less praise, some may test boundaries, some may feel unsettled by your steadiness. Others will feel drawn to it. This is not something to manage. It's a natural sorting. Internal authority changes the energy you bring into rooms. And slowly, something profound becomes clear. Validation was never meant to be your foundation. It was meant to be optional. When authority lives inside you, approval becomes pleasant, not necessary. Feedback becomes useful, not defining. Silence becomes comfortable, not threatening. This is where control deepens, not through dominance, not through recognition, but through self-trust. When you no longer need the world to confirm who you are, you move through it with a quiet confidence that doesn't ask permission. Internal authority doesn't demand attention. It doesn't announce itself. It simply stands. And that steadiness becomes your anchor during the day, in relationships, and in the quiet moments before sleep, when no one is watching and you are finally alone with yourself. As internal authority strengthens, another habit begins to loosen its grip. You notice it in conversations, in messages you almost send, in explanations that form before anyone even asks. The urge to clarify, to justify, to make sure you're understood. This urge once felt harmless, even polite. But with awareness, you start to see how heavy it really is. Not explaining yourself is not about secrecy or arrogance. It's about restraint. It's about knowing when words add clarity and when they only drain energy. Many explanations are not offered because they're needed, but because silence feels uncomfortable. Because being misunderstood feels threatening. Because approval still whispers in the background. Explaining yourself often comes from fear. Fear of being judged unfairly, fear of conflict, fear of losing connection. So you add context, you soften edges, you over-detail your reasoning. You hope that if people fully understand your intentions, they will accept your choices. But this hope quietly places your peace in someone else's hands. The truth is, explanation does not guarantee understanding. People hear through their own filters, their experiences, their moods, their biases. You can explain perfectly and still be misunderstood. When you make understanding your responsibility, you take on a burden that isn't yours to carry. The discipline of not explaining yourself begins with recognizing when an explanation is unnecessary, when your actions already align with your values, when your choice is clear to you, when you're not being accused, just questioned. Silence in these moments is not avoidance, it's self-respect. This discipline also protects clarity. Over-explaining often creates confusion. The more you add, the more room there is for misinterpretation. Short, grounded responses carry more weight. They signal confidence. Not forced confidence, but settled confidence. You don't rush to fill space because you're not afraid of it. There is also a nervous system shift here. Explaining activates stress. The body tightens. The voice changes. You're trying to manage perception. When you don't explain, the body relaxes. There's nothing to defend, nothing to prove. This calm is felt, not spoken. Many people explain themselves to avoid discomfort. But discomfort avoided doesn't disappear. It moves inward. It becomes tension, resentment, fatigue. The discipline of silence allows discomfort to exist without negotiation, and most of the time, it passes more quickly than expected. This practice changes how you listen. When you're not preparing explanations, you hear more clearly. You respond more honestly. You stop performing and start engaging. Conversations feel cleaner. There is less emotional noise, less pressure to manage outcomes. Not explaining yourself also reshapes boundaries. When boundaries are solid, they don't require justification. You don't need a long story to support a simple no. You don't need to convince others of your limits. You state them calmly and let reactions be what they are. This is not coldness, it's clarity. There will be moments when explanation is appropriate, when harm has occurred, when responsibility is needed, when learning is possible. Discipline doesn't mean silence always. It means choice. You explain when it serves truth, not when it serves anxiety. At first, this discipline can feel uncomfortable. Silence may feel exposed. You may worry about how you're perceived. But with practice, you notice something freeing. People adjust. Conversations simplify. You stop carrying mental drafts of explanations that never needed to exist. This shift also changes how you experience misunderstanding. You realize it's not always a problem to solve. Sometimes it's just a difference to accept. When you don't rush to correct every misinterpretation, you conserve energy. You allow life to move without constant commentary. At night, this discipline shows its value. The mind that explains all day replays all night. The mind that chooses silence rests more easily. There are fewer conversations to revisit, fewer justifications to rehearse. Sleep becomes quieter because the mind isn't carrying unfinished explanations. Not explaining yourself also strengthens detachment without coldness. You remain open, but not exposed. You share when it matters. You stay quiet when it doesn't. This balance creates emotional safety. You don't feel the need to manage how you're seen. Over time, people sense this boundary. They ask fewer unnecessary questions. They respect your space more, not because you demand it, but because your presence communicates it. Silence becomes a signal of self-command. This discipline also deepens trust in yourself. You stop outsourcing confidence. You stop needing others to validate your choices. You act, you observe, you adjust if needed. But you don't explain yourself into exhaustion. There is a quiet maturity in this, a sense that you don't need to narrate your life for it to be valid. You don't need to convince others to feel grounded. You allow your actions to speak and your silence to stand. And slowly, this becomes natural. You speak with intention. You pause without fear. You let misunderstandings pass when they're not worth correcting. Not out of indifference, but out of discernment. The discipline of not explaining yourself is not withdrawal from connection. It is a return to balance. Words regain meaning because they are no longer overused. Silence regains power because it is no longer avoided. And in that balance, you feel lighter, less reactive, more aligned. You realize that clarity does not always come from saying more. Often, it comes from knowing when to say nothing at all. As the discipline of silence settles in, another layer begins to soften naturally. You notice that behind many explanations was a deeper wish, not just to clarify, but to be understood, to be seen accurately, to have your intentions recognized. This need can feel innocent, even human. But when it tightens its grip, it quietly becomes a source of tension. The need to be understood keeps the mind turned outward. You replay words, tone, timing. You wonder how you came across. You worry that something important about you was missed. This pulls attention away from your own center and places it in the hands of perception you cannot control. Understanding, when demanded, becomes a moving target. Being misunderstood hurts because it touches identity. It feels like being unseen, like part of you is invisible or distorted. But the truth is, no one ever fully understands another person. Everyone interprets through their own experiences, beliefs, and emotional state. Expecting complete understanding sets a standard that reality cannot meet. When you release this need, something surprising happens. You don't become less expressive, you become freer. You stop carrying the weight of how others interpret you. You allow your actions and words to exist without constant correction. This creates emotional space space to breathe, space to be. The need to be understood often leads to overexposure. You share more than you want. You explain personal motivations to people who aren't ready to hear them. You try to bridge gaps that are not yours to close. This can leave you feeling drained or misunderstood anyway. Releasing the need allows you to choose what to share and with whom. There is also a quiet dignity in accepting misunderstanding. It doesn't mean you like it. It means you don't chase resolution at the cost of your peace. You recognize that some people are not meant to see you clearly, not because you failed, but because alignment is missing. This is not rejection, it's reality. Letting go of this need also reduces emotional reactivity. When you're not invested in being understood, criticism loses its sting. Silence from others doesn't spiral into meaning. You stop reading between lines. You take things more at face value. This steadies the mind. Relationships change here. Conversations feel lighter. You stop trying to manage impressions. You speak honestly without needing reassurance that it landed perfectly. Others may ask fewer questions. Some may misunderstand you and move on. Others may lean in more deeply. This is natural sorting, not loss. The body feels relief. When you're trying to be understood, the nervous system stays alert. You're scanning for signs of comprehension or confusion. When you let go, the body relaxes. There's nothing to monitor. You don't need to explain yourself into safety. At night, this release is especially noticeable. The mind that seeks understanding replays interactions, wondering how it came across. The mind that has let go rests more easily. There's no need to revisit conversations that don't require action. Sleep comes because the mind is not busy repairing invisible fractures. This doesn't mean you stop caring about connection. It means you stop forcing it. Genuine understanding arises naturally when there is mutual openness. It cannot be extracted through effort. When it's there, it feels effortless. When it's not, no amount of explanation can create it. There is also a deeper trust that forms. Trust in your own clarity. Trust that you know who you are, even if others don't fully see it. This trust becomes grounding. You don't feel erased by misunderstanding. You don't feel compelled to defend your inner world. Releasing the need to be understood is an act of self-respect. It says, I don't need external confirmation to exist fully. This doesn't make you isolated. It makes you centered. You connect from wholeness, not from need. Over time, this release reshapes identity. You stop defining yourself through others' perceptions. You become less reactive to misinterpretation. You allow complexity without explanation. This brings a quiet confidence that doesn't ask to be seen. It simply is. Some people will understand you deeply. Others never will. When you stop trying to control that outcome, relationships become simpler. You invest where there is resonance. You let go where there isn't. This is not closing off. It's aligning. And slowly, something peaceful settles in. You realize that being understood was never the foundation of peace. Being grounded was. When you no longer need the world to see you clearly, you see yourself more clearly. This clarity doesn't isolate you. It frees you. You move through conversations without tension, through silence without fear, through misunderstanding without collapse. Releasing the need to be understood is not giving up on connection. It's giving up on control. And in that release, you find something steadier than approval, self-trust, quiet, and the freedom to be exactly as you are, whether or not anyone fully understands it. As the need to be understood dissolves, attention settles even deeper, below thoughts, below emotions, into the body itself. You begin to notice something subtle but constant. Long before the mind forms stories, long before reactions appear, something inside is already deciding how the world is experienced. This is where the real struggle has always lived. Not in thoughts, not in circumstances, but in the nervous system. The nervous system is the silent translator of reality. It decides whether a moment feels safe or threatening, calm or overwhelming, manageable or exhausting. Two people can live the same event and walk away with entirely different experiences, not because of what happened, but because of how their nervous systems interpreted it. Most people think they are fighting thoughts, habits, or emotions. In truth, they are fighting a body stuck in survival mode. When the nervous system is dysregulated, the mind becomes reactive. Thoughts race, emotions spike, sleep fragments, focus collapses. No amount of positive thinking can override a system that believes it is under threat. This is why willpower alone rarely creates lasting change. You can decide to stay calm, to let go, to stop reacting. But if the nervous system is activated, those decisions feel impossible to maintain. The body pulls you back into old patterns because it is trying to protect you, even when no danger is present. Stress trains the nervous system to stay alert. Over time, alert becomes normal, tension becomes familiar. Rest starts to feel unsafe because the body doesn't know how to settle without vigilance. This is why stillness can feel uncomfortable at first. The body interprets quiet as uncertainty. The true battlefield is not between you and the world. It is between activation and regulation. When the nervous system is regulated, clarity returns naturally. When it is activated, even simple decisions feel heavy. You don't need to fix your life to feel better. You need to signal safety to the body. This signal doesn't come from explanation or logic. It comes from sensation. Slow breathing, gentle awareness, allowing the body to soften instead of bracing. These small shifts tell the nervous system that the threat has passed, even if the mind is still processing. When regulation begins, emotions lose intensity, not because they disappear, but because the body is no longer amplifying them. Anger becomes information instead of explosion. Fear becomes caution instead of panic. Sadness becomes movement instead of collapse. Emotional intelligence grows naturally when the body feels safe. The nervous system also shapes identity. When it's constantly activated, you start to believe you are anxious, reactive, or overwhelmed by nature. But these are states, not traits. Regulation reveals this truth. As the body settles, you recognize yourself beneath the tension. Calm doesn't feel forced, it feels familiar. This is why sleep is such a powerful ally. Sleep is when the nervous system resets, if it's allowed to. When emotional load is too high, sleep becomes shallow. The body never fully powers down. Learning to regulate before sleep changes everything. The body learns it is safe to release control. Regulation also changes how you relate to others. When your nervous system is calm, you don't mirror chaos as easily. You don't absorb tension from rooms. You don't escalate conflict unconsciously. You become a stabilizing presence, not because you try to be, but because your body is not signaling threat. This is real power, not dominance, not control over people, but control over internal state. When the nervous system is regulated, manipulation loses strength, urgency loses grip, fear-based decisions lose appeal. You respond instead of react, because the body is no longer demanding immediate action. Many people search for peace through understanding, insight, or analysis. These help, but only after regulation is restored. A dysregulated nervous system will override the smartest mind. This is why change often fails at night, under stress, or during conflict. The body takes over. The path forward is not force, it's familiarity. Teaching the body what calm feels like again, slowly, gently, repeatedly, not as a technique to master, but as a state to return to. Over time, regulation becomes the baseline instead of the exception. When this happens, life feels different without changing much at all. Noise feels quieter. Problems feel solvable. Time feels slower. You don't rush to escape discomfort because it no longer overwhelms you. You stay present because presence feels safe. This is why the nervous system is the true battlefield. Win here, and many struggles resolve on their own. Lose here, and no amount of control will bring peace. You don't need to fight your thoughts. You need to calm the system that produces them. You don't need to conquer the world. You need to reassure the body that it's allowed to rest. And when the nervous system finally learns that lesson, control stops feeling like effort. Calm becomes natural. Sleep becomes deep, and the mind, no longer braced for danger, becomes free to simply be. As the nervous system settles and no longer lives on constant alert, a quiet shift takes place in how you interpret your life. Events no longer feel as invasive. Emotions no longer feel like attacks. And slowly, almost without effort, the sense of being at the mercy of circumstances begins to loosen. This is where emotional ownership begins, and where victimhood quietly ends. Victimhood is not about weakness, it is about disconnection. It forms when emotions are experienced as something that happens to you rather than something that moves through you. When feelings feel imposed, the mind looks outward for causes. People become responsible. Situations become unfair. The past becomes heavy. This outward focus keeps power away from you, even when you are trying your best. Emotional ownership changes the direction of attention. Instead of asking, "Why did this happen to me?" the question becomes, "What is happening inside me right now?" This shift is subtle, but it is everything. You stop arguing with reality and start relating to your internal response. The event remains the same, but your position changes. Owning an emotion does not mean blaming yourself for it. It means recognizing it as yours without outsourcing responsibility. Anger, sadness, fear, disappointment. These are signals, not verdicts. When you own them, you stop needing others to change so you can feel better. You stop waiting for apologies, recognition, or closure to arrive before you can move forward. Victimhood often feels justified because pain is real, but when pain becomes identity, it limits movement. Emotional ownership allows pain without letting it define you. You feel fully without collapsing into the story of being wronged. This creates mobility. You can move through experience instead of being pinned by it. There is also a return of agency here. When emotions are owned, choices become visible. You may not choose what happens, but you can choose how you respond, what you carry, and what you release. This choice restores dignity. You stop feeling like life is happening at you and start feeling like you are participating in it. This doesn't mean suppressing emotion or pretending everything is fine. It means staying present with what you feel without dramatizing it or disowning it. Emotional ownership is calm acknowledgement. This is here, nothing more, nothing less. That acknowledgement alone reduces intensity because the nervous system no longer feels confused or overwhelmed. Victimhood often thrives on repetition. The same story is told internally again and again. The same emotions are relived. Ownership interrupts this loop. You feel the emotion once, fully, instead of reliving it through thought. This allows completion. What is felt consciously doesn't need to be replayed unconsciously. There is also a deep honesty in this practice. You stop pretending that others are responsible for your inner world. This honesty can feel uncomfortable at first. It removes familiar excuses. But it also removes helplessness. You no longer need permission to heal. You don't need conditions to be perfect. You can begin where you are. Emotional ownership also reshapes relationships. When you own your feelings, you stop projecting them. You communicate more clearly. You don't accuse to feel relief. You don't manipulate to get reassurance. You express from responsibility, not from demand. This changes dynamics. Conversations become less defensive. Boundaries become clearer. The body responds quickly to this shift. When emotions are owned, tension decreases. The body no longer braces against feelings or searches for external threats. It learns that emotions are safe to experience. This reduces chronic stress. Energy returns because the system is no longer fighting itself. At night, emotional ownership brings relief. The mind doesn't need to replay events to justify feelings. There is nothing to defend, nothing to prove. Emotions are acknowledged and allowed to settle. Sleep deepens because the body isn't holding unresolved emotional charge. This practice also changes how you relate to the past. You stop carrying old emotions forward as proof of identity. You remember without reliving. You learn without reopening wounds. The past becomes information, not a prison. Emotional ownership does not erase pain. It transforms your relationship with it. Pain becomes something you can sit with, move through, and eventually release. Victimhood keeps pain stuck because it waits for external resolution. Ownership allows internal completion. There is a quiet empowerment here, not the loud kind that asserts dominance, but the steady kind that restores balance. You don't feel superior. You feel grounded. You don't feel detached. You feel present. You stop seeing yourself as someone life happens to, and start seeing yourself as someone who can meet life fully. This shift does not happen all at once. It builds in moments. The moment you notice an emotion and stay with it instead of blaming. The moment you pause before telling the story again. The moment you choose to regulate instead of react. Each moment weakens victimhood and strengthens self-trust. Over time, identity changes. You are no longer defined by what hurt you. You are defined by how you relate to what you feel. This is real strength. Quiet, stable, and internal. And as emotional ownership becomes natural, something settles deeply. You no longer feel pushed around by your inner world. You carry responsibility without heaviness. You experience life without collapse. Victimhood ends not because life becomes fair, but because you stop handing your power away. When emotions are owned, they no longer own you, and in that ownership, freedom quietly returns. As emotional ownership becomes steady, another truth rises gently to the surface, one that sounds uncomfortable at first, even threatening to the ego, a truth many people resist for years. There are things you cannot control, and the moment you stop fighting that fact, something inside you finally relaxes. Powerlessness is often misunderstood. It's associated with defeat, weakness, giving up. But true powerlessness is not collapse. It is clarity. It is the moment you stop exhausting yourself trying to move what cannot be moved. It is the moment you put down a weight you were never meant to carry. Much of inner tension comes from pretending we have more control than we do. Control over outcomes, over timing, over how others feel, think, or change. When reality refuses to cooperate, frustration builds. The mind pushes harder, the body tightens, the nervous system stays alert. This is not strength. It is resistance disguised as effort. Accepting powerlessness doesn't mean disengaging from life. It means distinguishing between influence and control. You still act, you still choose, you still show up. But you stop demanding that your actions guarantee results. You release the illusion that effort should protect you from uncertainty. This release creates freedom because it ends an unwinnable battle. You no longer argue with reality. You no longer feel personally attacked by unpredictability. You stop asking life to explain itself. And without that demand, mental noise quiets. There is a surprising relief in admitting, this is not mine to fix. Not everything requires your intervention. Not every problem needs your solution. Not every outcome reflects your worth. When you accept this, the mind stops scanning for control points. It rests. The body feels this immediately. Muscles soften. Breathing deepens. The nervous system exits survival mode. Powerlessness, when accepted, signals safety. It tells the body that it can stop bracing because there is no longer a fight to win. This acceptance also sharpens focus. When you stop trying to control everything, attention returns to what is actually within reach. Your responses, your boundaries, your care, your direction. Energy is no longer scattered. It becomes available. There is also a deep humility here. Not humiliation, but realism. You recognize your place in the flow of things. You are not the center of every outcome, and that realization removes pressure. You stop over-identifying with success and failure. You participate fully without carrying the weight of omnipotence. Accepting powerlessness also transforms patience. When you no longer believe you can force timing, waiting becomes easier. You don't rush processes that need time. You don't push growth that needs space. You allow life to unfold at its own pace without interpreting delay as failure. This acceptance changes how you handle disappointment. Disappointment no longer feels like betrayal. It feels like information. You adapt instead of collapsing. You grieve without dramatizing. You move forward without dragging the past behind you. In relationships, accepting powerlessness is especially freeing. You stop trying to change people into versions you can live with. You stop negotiating with reality. You see people clearly and decide what you can accept and what you cannot. Boundaries become simpler. You stay or you step back. No force required. This doesn't mean passivity. It means honesty. You stop hoping someone will become different and start responding to who they actually are. This clarity prevents prolonged suffering. You stop waiting for signs that may never come. There is also a deep reduction in resentment. Resentment thrives on the belief that things should have gone differently because you did your part. Accepting powerlessness dissolves this belief. You recognize that effort does not entitle you to outcomes. It entitles you only to integrity. This shift frees the heart. At night, this freedom is especially noticeable. The mind no longer replays scenarios, trying to fix them retroactively. There is nothing to solve, nothing to redo. You did what you could. The rest was never yours. Sleep comes more easily when the mind stops carrying responsibility for the universe. Accepting powerlessness also reveals a paradox. When you stop trying to control everything, your influence often increases. You become calmer, more present, more attuned. People feel less pressure from you. Situations unfold more smoothly, not because you're trying harder, but because you're not interfering with unnecessary force. This acceptance creates resilience. When things fall apart, you don't shatter with them. You bend, you adapt, you recover. You trust your ability to respond rather than your ability to predict. This trust is grounding. It removes fear of uncertainty. There is a spiritual quality to this freedom, even without beliefs or labels. It's the sense of being carried by something larger than personal effort. Life moves. You move with it, not helplessly, but honestly. You stop pretending to be in charge of things that were never under your command. This doesn't make life smaller. It makes it lighter. You still care, you still strive, but you no longer confuse control with responsibility. You show up fully and release the rest. Over time, accepting powerlessness becomes a quiet strength. You don't need to announce it. You feel it in how you breathe, how you decide, how you rest. There is less urgency, less tension, less inner conflict. And as this acceptance settles, something becomes clear. The freedom you were searching for was never in having control. It was in knowing where control ends and being at peace with that boundary. When you accept powerlessness, you stop fighting reality and start living within it. And in that surrender, not forced but chosen, you discover a deeper form of power. One that doesn't strain, one that doesn't demand, one that simply allows you to be steady, even when life is not. As the acceptance of powerlessness settles, something subtle begins to work beneath the surface. You may not notice it right away. There is no dramatic shift, no sudden insight to announce itself. Instead, changes begin to appear quietly, almost without effort. Reactions soften. Old habits lose their grip. Responses feel different before you can explain why. This is the subconscious at work. The ego wants credit. It wants progress to be visible, logical, and intentional. It wants change to come from effort, discipline, and control. The subconscious doesn't work that way. It learns through repetition, emotion, and safety. It doesn't argue. It absorbs. And once it learns something, it doesn't need to be reminded. Most inner struggle comes from trying to force change at the ego level. You tell yourself to calm down, to let go, to stop reacting. But the body responds faster than thought. Patterns fire before logic arrives. This is because the subconscious has been trained for years, often in silence. It learned from experiences, not explanations. The subconscious doesn't respond well to commands. It responds to environments. Tone, rhythm, repetition. This is why calm music, steady breathing, and gentle words can change your state faster than harsh self-talk. The ego tries to push. The subconscious responds to invitation. This is also why change often feels easier at night. When the ego relaxes, the subconscious comes forward. Defenses lower. Resistance fades. The mind becomes receptive. What you expose yourself to during these hours matters deeply. Not because you're trying to learn, but because learning happens automatically. The ego wants to understand before it changes. The subconscious changes before understanding arrives. You may notice yourself reacting differently without knowing why. You pause instead of snapping. You detach without forcing it. You feel calmer without trying. This can feel unsettling to the ego because it loses its sense of control. But this is real progress. The subconscious learns through emotional association. If calm is repeatedly paired with safety, it becomes natural. If silence is paired with relief, the body stops fearing it. If rest is paired with permission instead of guilt, sleep deepens. These associations bypass logic. They don't need belief. They need consistency. This is why talking yourself into change often fails. Words alone don't retrain the nervous system. Experiences do, especially repeated, low-effort experiences. When the body repeatedly feels safe while doing nothing, it learns that it doesn't need to stay alert. This lesson sinks deeper than any affirmation. The ego often resists this process. It wants to analyze, to measure, to confirm progress. But the subconscious doesn't care about timelines or proof. It learns in the background, quietly, permanently. When you stop interfering, it does its work. This is also why forcing discipline can backfire. Harsh control signals danger. The subconscious tightens, it resists. Gentle structure works better. Regularity, familiar cues, calm repetition. These tell the body it's safe to change. When the subconscious leads, effort decreases. You don't need to remind yourself to relax, you just do. You don't need to convince yourself to let go, you already have. This is not weakness, it's efficiency. The subconscious handles what the ego struggles to manage. At night, this learning accelerates. The mind is less defensive. The body is receptive. Patterns soften. New associations form. This is why letting something play while you sleep can be powerful. Not because you're listening actively, but because the subconscious is absorbing tone, rhythm, and intention without resistance. The ego often underestimates this because it can't track it. There is no checklist, no milestone. But one day you notice that what once triggered you no longer does. That tension doesn't rise the same way. That rest comes easier. This is the subconscious showing you what it learned. Trusting this process requires humility. You stop demanding immediate results. You stop trying to control how change happens. You allow learning to unfold at its own pace. This aligns with everything you've already released. Control, resistance, expectation. The subconscious doesn't need pressure. It needs consistency and safety. When you provide those, it reorganizes quietly. Old patterns fade because they're no longer needed. New responses take their place because they feel better. This is why real change often feels anticlimactic. There is no moment of victory, just a sense that something is different, lighter, calmer, more natural. The ego may not feel accomplished, but the body feels settled, and that is the difference that matters. When you stop trying to force change and start allowing the subconscious to learn, progress stops feeling like work. It becomes something that happens to you gently, steadily, while you rest, while you breathe, while you sleep. The ego wants to lead. The subconscious already knows how. When you let it take over, you don't lose control. You gain efficiency. You gain peace. Because the deepest changes don't happen when you're trying hard. They happen when you finally stop getting in the way. As the subconscious begins to take the lead, you become more aware of something that once felt invisible. Energy. Not physical effort alone, but emotional energy. Where it goes, what drains it, what quietly consumes it without giving anything back. And with that awareness comes a natural question. Why spend so much on things that return so little? Most people live with emotional debt without realizing it. They invest attention in worries that never resolve. They spend energy on people who never reciprocate. They replay situations that are already over. This constant spending leaves them tired, irritable, and unfocused, even when life looks manageable on the surface. Emotional economy is the practice of noticing these leaks and choosing differently. Energy is not unlimited. The body knows this even when the mind pretends otherwise. When emotional energy is scattered, the nervous system stays strained. Focus weakens. Patience thins. Sleep suffers. But when energy is conserved and directed, life feels simpler, not easier, but cleaner. Emotional economy begins with discernment. Not every thought deserves attention. Not every feeling requires action. Not every situation needs your involvement. This is not avoidance, it's prioritization. You stop treating everything as equally important because it isn't. Much emotional energy is lost to anticipation. Worrying about what might happen. Preparing for conversations that may never occur. Rehearsing explanations you may never give. These activities feel productive, but they drain you without producing results. Emotional economy recognizes this pattern and gently interrupts it. Another major drain is rumination. The mind revisits the same moments, searching for closure or correction. But most closure doesn't come from thinking. It comes from letting experiences complete emotionally. When you stop feeding rumination with attention, it loses strength. Energy returns to the present. People are also a significant energy investment. Some interactions nourish, others deplete. Emotional economy doesn't judge this. It observes. You notice how you feel after certain conversations, lighter or heavier, grounded or tense. This awareness guides boundaries naturally. You don't need to cut people off dramatically. You simply adjust how much energy you offer. There is also the habit of emotional over-responsibility, taking on moods that aren't yours, feeling obligated to fix discomfort in others, absorbing tension in rooms. This habit drains energy quickly. Emotional economy teaches you to let others carry their own emotions. You can care without carrying. This practice changes how you respond to triggers. Instead of reacting immediately, you pause and ask a simple question. Is this worth my energy? Often the answer is no. Not because the situation doesn't matter, but because your involvement won't change it meaningfully. Letting go in these moments is not weakness, it's efficiency. Emotional economy also reshapes ambition. You stop chasing everything. You focus on what aligns with your values. You invest energy where it creates movement, growth, or peace. This doesn't mean doing less. It means doing what matters with full presence instead of doing everything halfway. The body responds positively to this shift. When energy is conserved, stress hormones decrease. Focus sharpens. Rest becomes restorative. You feel more capable, not because you're pushing harder, but because you're not leaking energy constantly. At night, this economy becomes especially important. The mind that spends energy all day arrives at bedtime depleted but restless. The mind that conserved energy arrives calm. Sleep deepens because there is less unfinished emotional business. The body doesn't need to stay alert because it wasn't overstimulated. Emotional economy also strengthens self-respect. You stop betraying yourself for temporary comfort or approval. You stop saying yes when it costs too much. You stop engaging in arguments that don't lead anywhere. Each of these choices reinforces internal authority. This doesn't mean becoming detached from life. It means becoming intentional. You still feel deeply. You still engage fully. But you don't waste energy on loops that go nowhere. You stop feeding patterns that exhaust you. Over time, this practice becomes intuitive. You feel when something is pulling too much. You feel when it's time to step back. You feel when silence is the better investment. This intuition grows because you're listening to the body, not just the mind. Emotional economy also creates space for joy. When energy is not constantly drained, there is room for curiosity, creativity, and connection. You're more present because you're not carrying invisible weight. Moments feel richer because attention is not split. This practice aligns deeply with everything that came before. Letting go of control, accepting powerlessness, trusting the subconscious. All of these reduce unnecessary spending. Emotional economy is the practical expression of inner mastery. You begin to understand that peace is not about eliminating challenges. It's about choosing where to invest yourself. When you spend energy only where it matters, life stops feeling overwhelming. Not because there is less to do, but because you are no longer everywhere at once. And as this becomes natural, you notice something quiet but powerful. You end most days with energy left. Not nervous energy, calm energy. The kind that allows rest. The kind that supports sleep. The kind that carries you forward without strain. This is the return on emotional economy. You stop living in deficit. You stop borrowing energy from tomorrow. You live within your means emotionally. And in doing so, you regain something many people lose over time: clarity, steadiness, and the ability to move through life without constant exhaustion. As emotional economy becomes natural, another shift happens without effort. You find yourself engaging less, but not withdrawing, responding less, but not avoiding. There is a calm selectiveness that takes shape, and with it comes a confidence that doesn't announce itself, the quiet confidence of non-engagement. Non-engagement is often misunderstood. It's seen as indifference, avoidance, or weakness. But true non-engagement is none of these. It is the decision to not invest energy where it will be wasted. It is restraint guided by awareness, not fear. And that restraint carries a strength that loud reactions never do. Most conflicts survive on participation. Arguments need responses. Provocations need reactions. Drama needs attention. When you stop feeding these systems, they collapse on their own. This is not strategy in the manipulative sense. It's understanding how energy works. What you give energy to grows. What you starve fades. Non-engagement begins internally. You feel the impulse to react, explain, correct, or defend, and you let it pass. Not because you are suppressing yourself, but because you recognize the cost. You see that responding will not bring clarity, resolution, or peace. It will only pull you into unnecessary friction. This choice builds confidence because it proves something to yourself. You realize you are not obligated to react. You are not controlled by triggers. You are not owned by every emotional invitation. Each time you choose not to engage, self-trust deepens. You know you can hold steady even when challenged. There is also a deep calm that comes from not entering every battle. The mind stays clearer. The body stays regulated. You don't carry emotional residue from interactions that never needed to happen. Your inner space remains intact. Non-engagement changes how others experience you. When you don't react, people lose leverage. They may test you at first, push harder, say more. But without emotional return, their effort falls flat. Some feel confused. Others feel exposed. A few feel threatened. But many feel the shift immediately. The dynamic changes. This is why non-engagement is often perceived as confidence. Not because you assert dominance, but because you don't need to. You are not seeking validation, control, or victory. You are choosing peace. And peace, when genuine, carries authority. Non-engagement also prevents escalation. Many situations don't need resolution, they need distance. Words spoken in emotional charge often create problems that silence would have avoided. By not engaging, you allow emotions to cool naturally. Time does what arguments cannot. This doesn't mean you never speak. It means you choose when your voice matters. You engage when there is openness, respect, or purpose. You step back when there is chaos, manipulation, or repetition. This selectiveness sharpens communication. When you do speak, people listen because they know you don't speak unnecessarily. There is also protection here. Emotional exposure has a cost. Every reaction reveals something. Every defense gives information. Non-engagement keeps your inner world private. You don't offer access to people who haven't earned it. This is not secrecy. It's self-respect. The body responds strongly to this practice. When you stop engaging in unnecessary tension, stress decreases, heart rate stabilizes, breathing deepens, you recover faster. Energy returns because it's not constantly being pulled outward. At night, the benefits multiply. The mind that engaged all day replays conversations, arguments, and imagined responses. The mind that chose non-engagement rests more easily. There is nothing to revisit, nothing to fix. Sleep becomes deeper because the nervous system is not carrying unfinished emotional exchanges. Non-engagement also strengthens detachment without coldness. You still care, but you don't cling. You still observe, but you don't absorb. You remain human without becoming entangled. This balance creates emotional safety. Some people will misunderstand this. They may call it distance. They may say, "You've changed." In a way, you have. You've stopped participating in patterns that drained you. You've stopped explaining yourself into exhaustion. You've stopped proving your worth through reaction. This change doesn't need justification. Non-engagement is especially powerful in situations where the goal is not understanding, but control. When someone wants a reaction to feel powerful, calm silence removes the reward. This is not passive aggression. It's refusing to participate in a game you never agreed to play. There is also humility in non-engagement. You recognize that not everything requires your input. Not every opinion needs correction. Not every moment needs your presence. This humility keeps the ego in check and the mind clear. Over time, this becomes instinctive. You feel when engagement would cost too much. You feel when silence would protect clarity. You no longer need to analyze every interaction. The body knows. The nervous system guides you. This practice aligns with everything you've already learned: emotional economy, detachment, internal authority, self-command. Non-engagement is the natural expression of these skills in real time. You begin to notice that life feels less noisy, not because the world changed, but because you stopped amplifying it. Your inner world becomes a quieter place. And in that quiet, confidence grows. Not the kind that proves itself, the kind that doesn't need to. The quiet confidence of non-engagement is not about avoiding life. It's about choosing how deeply you enter it. You step forward when it matters. You step back when it doesn't. You conserve energy. You protect clarity. You remain steady. And as this becomes part of who you are, you realize something important. Strength was never in reacting faster or louder. It was in knowing when to remain still. Non-engagement doesn't make you invisible. It makes you untouchable in the ways that matter most. As non-engagement becomes natural, you begin to notice what once quietly shaped so many of your choices. Not events, not outcomes, but opinions. What others think, what they might say, how they might interpret you. This weight is subtle, but heavy, and most people carry it without realizing how much it costs. Other people's opinions feel important because humans are wired for belonging. Long ago, being excluded meant danger. That instinct still lives in the nervous system, so when you sense judgment, approval, or disapproval, the body reacts as if survival is at stake. The heart tightens, the mind scans, behavior adjusts. This reaction is ancient, but it is no longer accurate. The psychological weight comes from believing that opinions are facts, that someone else's perception defines truth. But opinions are reflections, not realities. They are shaped by moods, experiences, insecurities, and limited information. When you carry them as truth, you let external noise shape your inner world. This weight shows up in small ways. You hesitate before speaking. You soften your stance. You second-guess decisions that already felt right. You replay conversations to see how you came across. None of this feels dramatic, but over time it drains clarity and confidence. You stop moving freely. You start managing perception. Carrying opinions also fragments identity. You become slightly different versions of yourself depending on the room. One version here, another there, each adjusted to fit expectations. This constant shifting creates inner tension. You may not notice it at first, but the body does. Fatigue builds. Restlessness grows. You feel tired without knowing why. The mind tries to solve this by gaining approval. If people think well of you, the weight lifts, temporarily. But approval is unstable. It changes quickly, and when it fades, the weight returns heavier than before. This creates a cycle of dependence. You become emotionally invested in reactions you cannot control. The psychological cost is not just stress, it's self-distance. You move further away from your own instincts. You stop trusting your inner signals. You start asking the world how to feel about yourself. This erodes internal authority and replaces it with constant checking. There is also fear beneath this weight. Fear of being misunderstood, fear of rejection, fear of being seen inaccurately. But as you've already learned, understanding and approval are not guaranteed. Trying to secure them only tightens the grip. Releasing the weight does not mean ignoring feedback or becoming careless. It means restoring perspective. Opinions are data, not directives. You can listen without obeying. You can consider without absorbing. This shift alone lightens the mind. When you stop carrying opinions, something stabilizes inside. You act from alignment instead of anticipation. You speak from truth instead of strategy. You allow others to have their reactions without internalizing them. This creates emotional space. The body responds immediately. Less tension, less vigilance. Breathing deepens. You no longer scan rooms for signals. You're present because you're not monitoring perception. Presence replaces performance. This also changes how criticism feels. When opinions lose authority, criticism no longer threatens identity. You evaluate it calmly. Is there something useful here? If yes, you integrate it. If not, you release it. There is no collapse, no defense, no overthinking. At night, the difference is clear. The mind that carries opinions replays interactions endlessly. The mind that releases them rests. Sleep deepens because the nervous system is not processing imagined judgments. There is nothing to fix, nothing to prove. This release doesn't isolate you. It actually improves connection. When you're not managing how you're seen, you're more authentic. Conversations feel easier. Laughter comes naturally. Silence feels safe. People sense this ease. Some are drawn to it. Others may feel unsettled by it. Both are fine. Letting go of opinions also reveals something surprising. Many of the judgments you feared were never there, and the ones that were had little impact once you stopped carrying them. Most people are absorbed in their own inner world. The weight you felt was often imagined, not imposed. This realization brings humility and relief. You stop assuming center stage in everyone else's mind. You step down from constant self-surveillance. Life feels lighter because you're no longer living under an invisible spotlight. There will still be moments when opinions sting. That's human. But they no longer lodge inside you. They pass through instead of settling. You feel them briefly, then return to center. This is where true freedom begins. Not freedom from judgment, but freedom from its grip. You no longer need to agree with how others see you to feel whole. You no longer need permission to be steady. As this understanding deepens, something shifts permanently. You stop living as a reflection. You start living as a source. Your actions come from clarity. Your rest comes from self-trust. Your confidence is no longer negotiated. The psychological weight of other people's opinions lifts not because the world becomes kinder, but because you stop handing it authority over your inner state. And when that weight is gone, you move differently, lighter, calmer, more direct, not because you don't care, but because you care enough about your peace to stop carrying what was never yours to hold. As the weight of other people's opinions lifts, another distinction becomes easier to see, one that quietly reshapes how you move through the world. You begin to notice the difference between forcing outcomes and shaping conditions, between gripping tightly and guiding gently. This is the difference between control and influence. Control is heavy. It relies on pressure, certainty, and constant involvement. It tries to eliminate unpredictability by managing every variable. When you seek control, you feel responsible for results that were never fully yours. You monitor closely. You intervene often. You tense against anything that doesn't follow the plan. Control demands effort because it is always fighting movement. Influence is lighter. It works indirectly. It doesn't demand obedience. It creates space for alignment. Influence understands that people and situations move according to their own internal logic. Instead of forcing change, it shapes the environment in which change becomes possible. Control wants guarantees. Influence accepts uncertainty. When you try to control, you focus on behavior. You want immediate results. You want compliance. You want visible change. This often creates resistance, even if it looks successful on the surface. People may adjust temporarily, but tension builds underneath. Control creates obedience, not transformation. Influence works at a deeper level. It affects tone, pace, and direction. It doesn't rush. It doesn't insist. It allows others to arrive at conclusions on their own. This takes patience, but it lasts. People change more fully when they feel ownership, not pressure. This distinction applies not only to others, but to yourself. Control over self looks like harsh discipline, constant self-monitoring, and inner criticism. Influence over self looks like guidance, structure, and compassion. One creates burnout, the other creates consistency. Many people confuse influence with weakness because it isn't loud. It doesn't assert itself dramatically. But influence is powerful precisely because it doesn't provoke defense. It doesn't trigger resistance. It moves beneath the surface. Control activates the nervous system. Influence calms it. When you try to control a situation, your body tightens, breathing shortens, thoughts speed up. You're braced for resistance. When you influence, the body stays relaxed. You observe more. You respond instead of react. This calm presence often shapes outcomes more effectively than force ever could. Influence also respects limits. It understands that some things cannot be changed from the outside. Control ignores this and exhausts itself trying anyway. Influence adapts. It works with what is available. It knows when to step forward and when to step back. This is especially important in relationships. Control tries to manage emotions, decisions, and outcomes. Influence focuses on honesty, boundaries, and example. You stop trying to make people change and start being clear about who you are and what you allow. This clarity itself influences dynamics. Influence also preserves dignity, yours and others. Control often erodes it. When you try to control, you may cross internal lines. You push too hard. You compromise values. You feel justified in the moment and unsettled later. Influence keeps you aligned. You act without betraying yourself. There is also less regret. Control-driven actions often leave residue. Words you wish you hadn't said. Efforts that felt forced. Influence leaves fewer emotional loose ends. You speak when it matters. You allow silence when it doesn't. This creates inner peace. Control seeks speed. Influence respects timing. Many things fail not because they were wrong, but because they were rushed. Control hates waiting. Influence understands pacing. It allows moments to unfold. It trusts that pressure is not always the answer. This patience often leads to better outcomes with less effort. This distinction becomes clearer at night. Control keeps the mind awake, reviewing what could have been managed better. Influence lets the mind rest because it knows it did what it could and released the rest. Sleep deepens when you stop replaying attempts to force outcomes. Influence also strengthens self-trust. You stop believing that everything depends on your effort. You trust your ability to respond when needed instead of preventing everything in advance. This reduces anxiety and frees mental space. There is a quiet maturity in choosing influence over control. It reflects an understanding of how life actually works. People resist being pushed, but respond to presence. Systems break under force, but adapt under guidance. The mind collapses under pressure, but opens under safety. This doesn't mean you become passive. Influence still involves action. It just involves the right kind of action. Action that aligns rather than dominates. Action that invites rather than compels. Over time, you notice a shift in how people respond to you. Less resistance, less friction, more openness. Not because you changed them, but because you stopped fighting them. Your steadiness becomes persuasive without effort. This also changes how you relate to outcomes. You stop tying self-worth to results. You focus on process, intention, and alignment. Success becomes something that unfolds, not something you squeeze out of life. The difference between control and influence is subtle, but once seen, it cannot be unseen. One exhausts, the other sustains. One tightens, the other opens. And as this understanding settles, you realize something important. You were never meant to control life or people. You were meant to influence your own state, your own actions, your own direction. From that place, influence flows naturally outward. When you let go of control and step into influence, effort decreases and impact increases. Not because you try harder, but because you stop working against reality. This is where power becomes efficient, quiet, grounded, effective. And in that efficiency, peace no longer feels like something to chase. It becomes a natural byproduct of moving through the world without trying to force it to obey. As the difference between control and influence becomes clear, something else begins to settle naturally. The urge to manage every external detail weakens, and in its place, a quieter strength takes root. Not in what you do, but in how you are. This is inner stillness, and it changes far more than it seems. Inner stillness is not the absence of thought, it's the absence of internal conflict. The mind may still think, emotions may still rise, but they no longer collide inside you. There is space between them, a steadiness that holds everything without tension. From the outside, it may look like calm. On the inside, it feels like alignment. When inner stillness is present, reactions slow down. You don't rush to interpret events. You don't jump to conclusions. You don't feel pulled into every emotional current around you. This creates stability, not because life becomes predictable, but because your responses become consistent. Consistency is what creates trust, both within yourself and around you. Outer stability is often chased through structure, routines, systems, plans. These can help, but without inner stillness, they become fragile. The moment something unexpected happens, anxiety spikes. The system collapses. Inner stillness, on the other hand, travels with you. It doesn't depend on circumstances. It holds steady, even when plans fail. This is why still people often appear reliable, not because they have all the answers, but because they don't panic, they don't escalate, they don't create chaos when uncertainty shows up. Their calm presence stabilizes the space. Others feel it instinctively. Nervous systems synchronize. Tension drops. Conversations slow. Decisions become clearer. Inner stillness also simplifies choices. When the mind is quiet, you can hear what matters. You don't overthink. You don't crowd decisions with unnecessary variables. You act from clarity instead of urgency. This makes outcomes more stable because they are not driven by fear or impulse. The body plays a central role here. Inner stillness tells the nervous system it's safe. When the body feels safe, stress responses quiet down. Hormones stabilize. Sleep improves. Energy evens out. This physical regulation supports emotional and mental stability. It becomes easier to show up consistently because you're not constantly recovering from internal strain. Stillness also changes how you handle pressure. Pressure no longer feels like a threat. It feels like information. You assess instead of react. You prioritize instead of overwhelm. This makes you dependable in moments that unsettle others. You become someone who can hold complexity without collapsing. There is also a ripple effect. When your inner world is steady, your external world organizes itself more naturally. Relationships feel clearer. Boundaries hold without force. Work flows with less friction, not because people change dramatically, but because your responses stop adding instability. Inner stillness doesn't mean disengagement. It means grounded engagement. You are fully present without being emotionally scattered. You listen without preparing defenses. You speak without pushing outcomes. This presence alone reduces conflict. Many problems dissolve when tension is removed from the interaction. At night, this stillness deepens. The mind doesn't replay the day endlessly. There is less to process because reactions were fewer. Sleep becomes a true reset. You wake up without carrying yesterday's emotional residue. This continuity creates outer stability across days, not just moments. Stillness also protects you during change. When life shifts, unexpected news, transitions, uncertainty, you don't lose your center. You adjust without panic. This adaptability is a form of stability that doesn't resist movement. It moves with it. There is a quiet confidence that grows here. You trust your ability to remain steady even when things are unclear. This trust reduces anxiety about the future. You stop trying to lock everything into place. You allow flexibility without fear. Inner stillness also sharpens perception. When the mind isn't noisy, you notice subtle cues. Timing, tone, energy. This awareness helps you respond appropriately instead of excessively. You act when action is needed and wait when it's not. This balance prevents many unnecessary disruptions. This stillness is not something you force. It emerges from everything you've already practiced. Non-reaction, detachment, emotional regulation, letting go of control. Each of these removes friction. Stillness is what remains when friction is gone, and once it's there, it becomes self-reinforcing. The calmer you are, the fewer situations escalate. The fewer escalations, the calmer you stay. Stability builds quietly, without effort. People often try to create stability by controlling the outside world. But the outside world is too complex, too alive, too unpredictable. Inner stillness offers a different approach. You stabilize the one place you can always access, your inner state. From there, everything else becomes easier to manage, not because it's controlled, but because it's met with clarity, sir. This is why stillness is not passive. It is active regulation. It is awareness in action. It is strength without tension. As inner stillness deepens, you stop chasing stability. You embody it. And when you embody it, the world around you begins to reflect it. Not perfectly, not always, but often enough to notice. Outer stability becomes less about holding things together and more about letting them settle around you. And in that settling, life feels less chaotic. Not because chaos disappeared, but because you no longer amplify it. Inner stillness doesn't promise a smooth life. It offers something better, a steady presence that can move through any life. That steadiness becomes your anchor, and from that anchor, everything else finds its place. As inner stillness takes root, a strange realization often follows. Life does not become perfectly ordered. Loose ends remain. Plans shift. Emotions rise at inconvenient times. And yet, instead of disturbing your balance, this messiness begins to feel manageable, even natural. This is where the paradox appears. The more you stop trying to clean everything up, the steadier you become. Many people believe peace comes from resolution, from clarity, from everything being in its proper place. So they spend their lives organizing, fixing, refining, waiting for the moment when things finally make sense. But life is not a finished product. It is a process, and processes are inherently messy. Messiness doesn't mean chaos. It means incompleteness. It means uncertainty. It means living with unanswered questions and unresolved feelings without needing to rush them into shape. When you resist this, tension builds. You push for closure where none exists. You force meaning where time is still working. This effort exhausts you. Letting life be messy doesn't mean giving up. It means giving space. Space for things to unfold without your constant interference. Space for emotions to move without being immediately labeled. Space for situations to reveal themselves in their own time. This is uncomfortable at first because the mind craves order. It wants clean narratives, clear roles, defined outcomes. Messiness threatens that sense of control. It feels unsafe. But when you stop fighting it, something shifts. You realize that safety doesn't come from order. It comes from flexibility. Flexibility allows you to hold contradiction, to feel uncertain without panic, to not know without collapsing. You stop needing answers before you can breathe. This alone reduces a huge amount of inner pressure. Letting life be messy also changes how you treat yourself. You stop expecting constant clarity, constant motivation, constant growth. You allow off days, confusion, emotional swings. You stop treating these as failures and start seeing them as part of being human. This self-acceptance softens the inner voice. Compassion replaces criticism. Messiness also protects creativity and intuition. When everything must be structured, nothing new can emerge. Some insights arrive only through disorder. Some growth happens only when plans fall apart. By allowing mess, you allow discovery. In relationships, this paradox is especially powerful. Trying to keep everything smooth often creates distance. Real connection includes awkwardness, misunderstandings, emotional fluctuations. When you allow messiness, you allow honesty. You stop managing impressions and start showing up as you are. This deepens trust. There is also less emotional urgency. You don't rush to resolve every tension. You don't force conversations before they're ready. You let things breathe. Often, what felt like a problem softens on its own when given time. What needed fixing dissolves when it's no longer pressured. The nervous system responds positively to this permission. When you stop demanding order, the body stops bracing. It no longer feels like it has to hold everything together. This reduces chronic stress. You feel lighter because you're no longer carrying the responsibility of perfection. At night, letting life be messy allows rest. You don't need to tie every loose end before sleeping. You trust that unfinished things can wait. The mind releases control. Sleep deepens because there's no pressure to resolve the day before resting. This paradox also reshapes resilience. When you expect life to be clean and predictable, mess feels like failure. When you accept mess as part of the process, setbacks lose their sting. You recover faster because you're not shocked by imperfection. Letting life be messy doesn't remove responsibility. It refines it. You focus on what truly needs action and release what needs time. You stop confusing urgency with importance. This clarity prevents burnout. There is also a deeper humility here. You recognize that not everything is meant to be understood immediately. Some things ripen slowly. Some answers come only after experience, not analysis. You stop forcing insight and start allowing wisdom to form. Messiness also makes joy more real. When you don't demand perfect conditions, you notice small moments. Laughter in the middle of uncertainty, calm inside complexity, beauty alongside confusion. Life becomes richer because it's not filtered through rigid expectations. This paradox aligns with everything you've learned so far. Letting go of control, accepting powerlessness, trusting the subconscious, conserving energy. All of these create space. Messiness is what fills that space naturally. You begin to see that order emerges on its own when you stop interfering. Not rigid order, but living order. One that adapts, one that breathes, one that doesn't collapse when disrupted. The more you allow life to be messy, the less messy it feels internally. You stop fighting the current. You float with awareness. This doesn't mean drifting aimlessly, it means moving without strain. Over time, this acceptance becomes grounding. You no longer wait for life to clean itself up before you relax. You relax within it, and that relaxation changes how everything unfolds. The paradox reveals itself fully here. By letting life be messy, you stop creating inner chaos. By allowing uncertainty, you reduce fear. By accepting imperfection, you find stability. Life doesn't need to be neat to be meaningful. It doesn't need to be resolved to be lived. When you stop demanding order, you gain freedom, and in that freedom, something quiet settles in. You realize you don't need life to make sense to feel okay. You just need to stay present as it moves. Letting life be messy isn't surrender to disorder. It's trust in your ability to navigate it. And that trust becomes one of the most stabilizing forces you can carry. As life is allowed to be messy, another unexpected experience often appears. Things grow quieter, less dramatic, less urgent. And instead of relief, the mind sometimes reacts with restlessness, a subtle discomfort, an itch to do something, fix something, stir something up. This is where many people misunderstand peace. Peace can feel boring to an untrained mind because the mind has been conditioned by intensity. For years, maybe decades, it has lived on stimulation, problems to solve, emotions to chase, conflicts to manage, futures to worry about. Activity became normal, noise became familiar, tension became identity. When that stimulation fades, the mind doesn't immediately feel calm. It feels empty. This emptiness isn't lack, it's withdrawal. Just like the body reacts when a stimulant is removed, the mind reacts when drama disappears. It looks for something to grip, something to chew on, something to react to. Peace offers none of that. It doesn't reward analysis. It doesn't engage urgency. It doesn't create adrenaline. So the mind labels it boring. But boredom here is not absence of meaning. It's absence of stimulation the mind was addicted to. An untrained mind equates intensity with aliveness. Strong emotions feel real. High stakes feel important. Even anxiety can feel familiar enough to be comforting. Peace, by contrast, feels flat at first. There's no emotional spike, no narrative, no urgency. The mind, unused to resting, interprets this neutrality as dullness. This is why some people unconsciously sabotage calm. When things settle, they pick a fight. Reopen an old worry. Scroll endlessly. Overthink a harmless moment. Anything to bring back stimulation. Not because they want chaos, but because their nervous system hasn't learned how to feel safe without it. Peace feels boring until the mind learns how to be present instead of entertained. Presence is subtle. It doesn't shout. It doesn't demand attention. It asks the mind to slow down enough to notice small things. The breath, the body, the moment as it is. A mind trained on intensity finds this unfamiliar. It wants more, faster, louder. But peace is not meant to entertain the ego. It's meant to restore the system. When peace arrives, the nervous system begins repairing itself. Stress hormones lower, muscles release, thoughts slow. This healing phase feels quiet because it is quiet. The body is recalibrating. The mind is reorganizing. There is nothing dramatic about repair, and that's exactly why it feels strange at first. Peace also removes distraction. Without constant noise, unresolved feelings surface. Old emotions, subtle sadness, lingering fatigue. The mind may interpret this as something being wrong, when in fact, it's something finally being felt. Peace creates space, and space reveals what was hidden. This is another reason peace feels boring or uncomfortable. There's nowhere to run, no stimulation to hide behind, just awareness. And awareness requires courage when you're not used to it. An untrained mind also mistakes peace for stagnation. It worries that calm means lack of ambition, lack of growth, lack of movement. But peace doesn't stop progress. It removes unnecessary struggle. Action still happens, but it comes from clarity instead of pressure. Over time, the mind adapts. What once felt boring begins to feel spacious. What felt empty begins to feel full. You start to notice depth instead of drama, texture instead of intensity. Silence becomes rich instead of dull. This shift doesn't happen overnight. It requires exposure. The mind needs time to detox from overstimulation. Just as eyes adjust to darkness, awareness adjusts to quiet. And once it does, peace reveals a different kind of richness. A trained mind finds peace nourishing. It recognizes how much energy was wasted on unnecessary tension. It begins to enjoy simplicity. Stillness stops feeling like nothing and starts feeling like enough. At night, this difference becomes clear. The untrained mind resists sleep because quiet feels unfamiliar. The trained mind welcomes it because rest feels safe. Peace becomes a place to return to, not something to escape. This is why calm practices can feel dull at first. Meditation, stillness, silence. They don't provide immediate reward, but with time, they retrain the mind to find satisfaction in presence instead of stimulation. Peace is not boring, it is subtle, and subtlety requires sensitivity. Once sensitivity develops, peace becomes deeply satisfying. You notice how it supports clarity, how it stabilizes emotions, how it creates space for real joy, not frantic happiness. Joy that arises from peace is quieter, but it lasts longer. It doesn't crash. It doesn't demand more. It settles into the body and stays. The untrained mind seeks excitement because it doesn't trust stillness. The trained mind rests in stillness because it no longer needs excitement to feel alive. And this is the final shift. When peace stops feeling boring, you stop chasing chaos. You stop mistaking intensity for meaning. You stop believing that life needs to be loud, to be full. Peace becomes something you protect, not something you question. And once the mind learns this, it no longer reaches for drama out of habit. It chooses calm, not because it's virtuous, but because it feels right. That is when peace stops being an absence of noise and becomes a presence of clarity. Not thrilling, not dramatic, just deeply, quietly alive. As peace becomes familiar and no longer feels empty, a quieter skill begins to emerge on its own. You notice that fewer things reach you, fewer comments linger, fewer moods attach themselves. Not because you argued, explained, or drew lines in the sand, but because something shifted internally. This is the power of emotional boundaries that require no confrontation. Most people think boundaries must be announced, declared, defended. They imagine difficult conversations, firm statements, emotional explanations. Sometimes those are necessary. But the strongest boundaries often need no words at all. They form when your inner world becomes less available to what does not belong there. Emotional boundaries begin with recognition. You start noticing what is yours to feel and what is not. Someone else's frustration no longer automatically becomes your tension. Someone else's disappointment no longer turns into your guilt. You allow emotions to exist around you without letting them settle inside you. This is not detachment from people. It is detachment from emotional absorption. You can listen without internalizing. You can care without carrying. You can be present without being invaded. This distinction changes everything. Confrontation often arises when boundaries are unclear internally. When you don't fully know where you end and others begin, you feel overwhelmed. Resentment builds. Eventually, it spills out as confrontation. But when boundaries are clear inside, there is less to confront. You are not holding what doesn't belong to you. These boundaries show up as calm pauses, as shorter responses, as less urgency to fix or respond. You stop reacting to emotional hooks. When someone tries to pull you into drama, you don't argue with it. You simply don't enter. The lack of engagement communicates more clearly than any speech. People often sense this shift immediately. Some will adjust their behavior. Others may push harder at first, testing the old access points. But without emotional reinforcement, those attempts fade. Patterns survive on response. Without response, they dissolve. Emotional boundaries without confrontation also protect your nervous system. Every emotional exchange has a physiological cost. When you stop absorbing what isn't yours, the body relaxes. You feel less drained after interactions. You recover faster. You no longer need hours alone just to feel normal again. This practice also changes how you experience responsibility. You stop feeling accountable for other people's feelings. You stop managing moods that aren't yours. You recognize that everyone has their own inner world to navigate. This recognition is not cold. It's respectful. It allows others to grow without interference. Boundaries like this are quiet because they are embodied, not spoken. Your tone stays steady. Your presence remains calm. You don't need to justify your distance. You don't need to announce your limits. Your behavior reflects them naturally. There is also less guilt. When boundaries require confrontation, guilt often follows. You worry about hurting someone, about being misunderstood. When boundaries are internal, guilt has less room to grow. You are not rejecting anyone. You are simply not overextending yourself. This doesn't mean you never address issues directly. It means you don't do it reactively. You choose when conversation is useful and when silence is more effective. You stop engaging in emotional negotiations that go nowhere. You conserve energy for interactions that are honest and reciprocal. At night, these boundaries show their value clearly. The mind is quieter because you didn't absorb the day's emotional debris. There are fewer conversations replaying, less resentment simmering. Sleep comes easier because your inner space wasn't crowded with other people's feelings. Emotional boundaries without confrontation also build self-trust. You stop abandoning yourself to keep peace. You stop tolerating discomfort just to avoid conflict. You respect your own limits quietly, consistently. This consistency creates inner safety. Over time, people relate to you differently. Some feel calmer around you. Some feel less able to provoke you. Some may drift away because the old dynamics no longer work. This is not loss. It is alignment. Relationships that rely on emotional access without respect cannot survive clear boundaries. These boundaries also protect compassion. When you're not overwhelmed, you can care more genuinely. You're not exhausted by empathy. You're not resentful of needs. You offer presence from fullness, not depletion. There is a maturity in this approach. You realize that not every boundary needs to be spoken. Not every feeling needs to be shared. Not every issue needs to be resolved through discussion. Some things resolve through non-participation. This doesn't make you passive. It makes you selective. You choose where to invest emotionally. You choose what enters your inner world. This choice is rarely noticed by others, but it is deeply felt by you. As this becomes natural, you stop thinking in terms of protection and start living in terms of clarity. You don't feel guarded, you feel grounded. You don't feel closed, you feel contained. Emotional boundaries that require no confrontation are the result of everything you've practiced so far. Non-reaction, detachment, emotional economy, internal authority. They are not techniques. They are expressions of inner alignment. And once they are in place, life feels quieter. Not because people changed, but because you stopped absorbing what was never yours. You don't need to explain these boundaries. You don't need to defend them. You don't need permission to have them. They exist because you do. And in that quiet containment, you discover a deep form of freedom. The freedom to move through the world open, calm, and intact, without fighting, without withdrawing, and without losing yourself along the way. As emotional boundaries become effortless, another source of quiet strain comes into focus. Not from people, not from situations, but from something closer. Something that follows you everywhere. Your thoughts. More specifically, the habit of believing they are who you are. Over-identifying with thoughts is one of the most expensive inner habits a person can carry. Not because thoughts are bad, but because they are temporary. When you treat something temporary as identity, instability follows. The mind produces thoughts constantly, some useful, some repetitive, some distorted, some simply noise. When every thought is taken personally, the inner world becomes crowded and reactive. Most people don't realize how much energy they spend believing their thoughts. A worry appears and the body reacts as if it's true. A judgment surfaces and identity tightens around it. A memory flashes and emotion floods in as if the past is happening again. The cost is immediate. Tension rises. Focus narrows. Peace disappears. Thoughts are not facts. They are mental events. But when you identify with them, they become commands. You follow them automatically. You argue with them. You defend them. You build stories around them. And the more you engage, the more convincing they feel. This habit often starts early. You learn to think your way through problems. Thinking becomes a tool. Over time, the tool becomes the driver. The mind stops assisting and starts leading. Every thought feels urgent. Every idea feels meaningful. Silence feels unsafe because it leaves no thoughts to hold on to. Over-identification also creates emotional whiplash. One moment you feel confident. The next, doubtful. One thought lifts you. Another sinks you. Identity rises and falls with mental weather. This is exhausting because thoughts change quickly and identity was never meant to. When you step back and observe thoughts instead of merging with them, something shifts. You notice that thoughts come and go without effort. They arise on their own. They fade on their own. You don't have to chase them, fight them, or finish them. This observation loosens their grip. The body responds strongly to this distance. When thoughts are no longer treated as threats or truths, stress decreases. Muscles relax. Breathing steadies. The nervous system calms because it's no longer reacting to every mental fluctuation. Over-identification also keeps old patterns alive. The same thoughts repeat because they're fed with attention. You revisit the same fears, the same self-stories, the same doubts. Not because they are true, but because they feel familiar. Familiarity feels safe, even when it hurts. Letting thoughts pass without ownership breaks this loop. You don't suppress them. You don't analyze them. You let them move through like weather. Clouds don't need to be explained to pass. Thoughts don't either. This doesn't mean becoming passive or empty. It means shifting from identification to awareness. Awareness notices thoughts without becoming them. This creates space, and in that space, choice returns. Over-identification also distorts self-image. A single thought can define your mood for hours. I'm behind. I failed. I'm not enough. These thoughts feel convincing because they speak in first person, but they are still just thoughts. When you believe them, you reinforce a narrative that may have no grounding in reality. When you stop identifying, these narratives lose power. They may still appear, but they no longer dominate. You don't need to replace them with positive thoughts. You simply stop treating them as identity. At night, this shift becomes especially important. Over-identified minds don't sleep easily. Thoughts replay. Scenarios loop. The mind feels responsible for solving everything before rest. Awareness, by contrast, allows thoughts to rise and fall without engagement. Sleep comes because the mind is no longer busy managing identity. This practice also strengthens emotional regulation. When thoughts are seen as passing events, emotions lose intensity. You don't spiral as easily. You feel without collapsing into stories. This creates emotional stability without suppression. Over-identifying with thoughts also fuels comparison. You measure yourself against imagined standards. You replay what others might think. These comparisons exist only in thought, but when believed, they feel real. Awareness dissolves them by revealing their source. There is also a return of creativity here. When thoughts are not tightly controlled or believed, new ones emerge naturally. Insight appears without force. Solutions arise without struggle. The mind becomes a space instead of a battlefield. This shift doesn't require effort. It requires noticing. The moment you notice a thought as a thought, identification loosens. The moment you stop arguing with it, it loses momentum. The moment you let it pass, it completes itself. Over time, this changes identity at a deep level. You stop defining yourself by mental content. You become the one who notices. This is not dissociation. It's clarity. You are still engaged, still human, still responsive, but no longer trapped inside every idea that appears. The cost of over-identifying with thoughts is constant tension. The benefit of releasing that identification is freedom. Freedom from mental noise. Freedom from emotional spikes driven by passing ideas. Freedom to rest in awareness instead of identity. This aligns with everything you've already practiced. Non-reaction, detachment, emotional boundaries, stillness. All of them rely on one core skill, knowing that you are not your thoughts. Thoughts will continue to appear. That is not the problem. The problem was believing they were you. When you stop doing that, the mind becomes lighter, the body becomes calmer. Life feels more spacious because there is no longer a voice narrating every moment as a threat or a test. You don't need to silence the mind. You just need to stop living inside it. And when that happens, something profound settles in. You realize that peace was never on the other side of better thoughts. It was on the other side of believing every thought that appeared. Once that belief loosens, control becomes effortless. Not because you manage the mind, but because you stop being managed by it. And in that space, quiet, clear, and open, you finally experience what it means to be present without being trapped inside your own thinking. As the grip of thought loosens, a deeper shift becomes possible. You stop wrestling with what appears in the mind, and something even quieter takes its place. Not effort, not analysis, but acceptance. And when acceptance is genuine, it stops feeling like resignation and starts feeling like freedom. Acceptance is often misunderstood as weakness, as giving up, as tolerating what shouldn't be tolerated. But real acceptance is not agreement. It is not approval. It is the decision to stop arguing with reality. And that decision releases an enormous amount of trapped energy. Most inner suffering is not caused by what is happening, but by the refusal to let it be happening. The mind says, "This shouldn't be here. I shouldn't feel this. This should have gone differently." These thoughts keep you locked in resistance. Acceptance opens the door out. When you accept something fully, the inner fight ends. The body stops bracing. The mind stops looping. You are no longer split between what is and what you wish were. That wholeness is where liberation begins. Acceptance does not mean passivity. It means clarity. You see the situation as it is, not as you fear it or hope it will become. From that clarity, action becomes more effective. You stop wasting energy on denial and use it to respond wisely. There is a physical relief that comes with acceptance. Shoulders drop, breath deepens, the nervous system exits survival mode. This happens because the body is no longer receiving mixed signals. It no longer feels like it must fight reality to survive. Safety returns. Acceptance also frees emotion. When feelings are allowed without resistance, they move. When they are resisted, they stagnate. Many emotions feel permanent only because they are being blocked. Acceptance lets them complete their cycle. What is felt fully does not need to linger. This is why acceptance often brings relief faster than effort. You stop trying to fix the feeling and simply allow it. In that allowing, intensity decreases. The mind no longer amplifies the emotion with stories. The body processes it naturally. Acceptance also changes identity. You stop seeing yourself as someone who is broken or behind because of what you feel or experience. You become someone who can hold reality without collapse. This builds deep self-trust. There is also a reduction in fear. Much fear comes from avoiding what already is. When you accept the present, fear loses fuel. You realize you can survive the moment as it is. This realization is grounding. At night, acceptance is especially liberating. You stop needing the day to make sense before resting. You stop replaying events, trying to change them. Sleep becomes possible because the mind is no longer demanding resolution before peace. Acceptance also softens judgment of yourself and others. You stop labeling experiences as failures or mistakes. You see them as part of movement. This perspective reduces bitterness and increases resilience. There is a paradox here. The more you accept, the more change becomes possible. Resistance freezes things in place. Acceptance allows flow. When you stop fighting what is, it naturally begins to shift. Acceptance is not a technique, it is a stance, a willingness to meet reality without armor. This does not make you vulnerable, it makes you adaptable. You stop wasting strength on defense and use it for navigation. As acceptance deepens, liberation follows quietly. You feel lighter because you are no longer carrying an internal argument. You are present because you are not divided. You are free not because circumstances changed, but because your relationship with them did. This is the moment acceptance becomes liberation. When you realize you don't need life to be different to feel at peace. You just need to stop fighting what is already here. And in that surrender, not forced, not dramatic, but honest, you discover a freedom that effort could never create. As acceptance settles into the body, something subtle becomes possible. Not a dramatic change, not a sudden transformation, but a small opening in time. A moment between what happens and what you do. That moment is the pause, and learning to live inside it changes everything. Most reactions are not choices, they are habits. The body senses something, the mind labels it, and action follows almost instantly. Words come out, emotions surge. The moment passes, and only afterward does awareness arrive. The pause was never there, or rather, it was never noticed. Training the mind to pause is not about suppression. It's about creating space. Space where awareness can step in before momentum takes over. This space may be brief at first, a single breath, a fraction of a second, but it is enough to shift direction. The pause begins in the body, not the mind. Reaction starts as sensation. Tightness in the chest, heat in the face, a rush of energy. If you wait for thoughts to calm, you're already late. But if you notice sensation early, you can slow the chain before it completes itself. This is why breath is so powerful. A slow breath interrupts automatic patterns. It tells the nervous system to wait, not to shut down, but to slow. When the body slows, the mind follows. The pause appears naturally. At first, the pause feels uncomfortable. The mind wants to act, to resolve, to release tension through movement or speech. Sitting inside the pause feels like holding energy without an outlet. But this discomfort is temporary, and what follows is clarity. In the pause, you see options. You realize you don't have to say everything you think. You don't have to follow every urge. You don't have to match the energy in front of you. This realization is empowering. It returns choice. Training this skill requires repetition, not force. You don't need to pause perfectly. You just need to notice when you didn't. Each time you catch yourself reacting automatically, awareness grows. Over time, the pause begins to appear sooner. This pause protects relationships. Many conflicts are not caused by truth, but by timing. Things said too fast, too charged, too raw. When you pause, words soften. Tone shifts. You speak from clarity instead of impulse. This changes outcomes without manipulation. The pause also protects self-respect. When you react automatically, you often act against your values. You explain too much. You defend unnecessarily. You lash out or shut down. Pausing allows alignment. You respond in a way that feels right afterward, not regrettable. There is a biological shift that comes with this training. The nervous system learns that not every stimulus requires action. Over time, baseline reactivity decreases. Triggers lose intensity. The body becomes less jumpy. Calm becomes accessible. This is especially important under stress. Stress shortens the gap between stimulus and reaction. Training the pause lengthens it again. Even under pressure, you regain a moment of choice. That moment is enough to prevent escalation. At night, this skill integrates deeply. The subconscious absorbs the pattern of pausing without effort. Over time, reactions soften automatically. You don't have to remember to pause. The body does it for you. The pause also changes how you experience emotion. Instead of being swept away, you feel emotion rise and fall without immediate action. This teaches the nervous system that emotions are safe to feel. They don't require discharge. They pass when allowed. This training is not about becoming slow or indecisive. It's about becoming precise. You act when action matters. You speak when words add value. You stay still when stillness is wiser. This precision conserves energy and builds confidence. As the pause becomes familiar, life feels less reactive. You stop living in damage control. You stop cleaning up after impulses. You move through situations with steadiness because you are no longer rushing to escape discomfort. This pause is where self-command lives. It's where acceptance turns into action. It's where awareness meets choice. And it's trainable. You don't need to pause forever, just long enough to remember who is choosing. And in that brief, quiet space, control shifts back where it belongs, not over the world, but over yourself. You've just walked a quiet path inward, not to escape the world, but to stop fighting it. You learned that control was never meant to live outside of you, that reactions drain power, that expectations create suffering, that calm is strength, that boundaries don't need battles, that thoughts are not identity, that acceptance frees energy, that self-control is self-respect, and that peace, once trained, becomes natural. Nothing here asked you to change the world, only to return to yourself. If even one part of this settled something inside you, leave a comment with a word that captures how you feel right now. One word is enough. It helps others find this space too. And if you want more nights like this, more clarity, calm and inner strength, subscribe to the channel and stay with us. Let this continue while you rest, while you reset, while you sleep. Control yourself. Let the world move as it will, and allow tonight to finish the work effort never could.